Richard Whitmore grabbed Claire by the wrist in the middle of the county attorney's office and yanked her backwards so hard she stumbled into the wall. 3 people in that room watched it happen. Nobody moved. He leaned in close enough that only she could hear him, and he said very quietly, "Sign the transfer papers or I will make sure you leave this county with nothing. Not the ranch, not your name, not one person willing to stand beside you." Then he straightened his jacket, smiled at the clerk behind the desk, and walked out like a man who had just settled a minor inconvenience. That was the moment Ethan Walker walked in. Before we go any further, if this story already has your attention, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. His name was Ethan Walker. 34 years old. Broad shoulders from years of real work, hands that knew the difference between a good beam and a rotting one. He had been back in Willow Creek, Colorado for exactly 6 weeks when the call came in, and in those 6 weeks, he had already learned one thing with absolute certainty. Small towns don't need facts to build a story. They only need a name. And in Willow Creek, there was one name that stopped conversations. Claire Whitmore. Ethan had heard it the first morning he walked into Rudy's gas station to fill up his truck. Rudy himself was the one who brought it up, leaning over the counter like he was sharing classified information. "You seen that old Whitmore Ranch yet?" Rudy said, scratching his jaw. "Out past Miller's Road." "Can't say I have," Ethan said. "Don't bother." Rudy shook his head slowly, the way a man does when he's already made up his mind about something and enjoys making it dramatic. "The woman living out there, Claire Whitmore, she's bad news. Married Thomas Whitmore for his money, spent years pushing him away from his own family, and after he passed, let the whole place rot. 12 families used to work that land, now half of them are gone." Ethan nodded without much of a response and paid for his gas. But he heard the name again that same afternoon at Lou's Diner, this time from the waitress who refilled his coffee without being asked. Her name was Patty. She had kind eyes and a heavy pour. "I don't usually gossip," Patty said, which meant she was about to, "but since you're new in town, or I guess back in town, I just want you to know, if someone ever asks you to do work out at the Whitmore property, you say no. Simple as that." "Why's that?" Ethan asked. Patty lowered her voice like she was in a church. "That woman Claire, she drove Thomas to an early grave. Sweet man, gave her everything, and she just took it and let it fall apart." She shook her head. "Some people are just not right, you know, in here." She tapped 2 fingers against her chest. Ethan nodded again. He was getting good at nodding. The 3rd time he heard Claire's name was from his own neighbor, Dale Hutchins, a man who had known Ethan's father, Robert Walker, for over 30 years. Dale came over with a 6-pack the second evening Ethan moved back into the family house on Birch Street, and they sat on the porch the way men do in small towns, just existing next to each other, watching nothing in particular. "Glad you're back," Dale said. "Your dad needs you around." "I know," Ethan said. There was a long pause. Dale cracked open another can. "Stay away from the Whitmore Ranch," Dale said. "Not as advice, as fact." Ethan looked at him. "I've been hearing that a lot lately." "Then maybe you should listen," Dale said. "Richard Whitmore is a good man. He's been trying to clean up that mess out there for years. That woman just won't let go. Pride, that's all it is." Ethan didn't say anything to that. He just looked out at the dark street and thought about how it was interesting the way everyone described Claire Whitmore. Not one of them said they had spoken to her. Not one of them mentioned a conversation, a disagreement, a specific moment. They just knew. The way people in small towns always just know. He went to bed that night thinking he probably would never have a reason to find out the truth himself. He was wrong about that. The call came in at 6:42 in the morning 3 days later. Ethan was in his construction office, a small building he rented on the east side of town, drinking his first coffee and going through invoices his father had let pile up during the months he'd been in the hospital. Robert Walker had run Walker Construction for 22 years. Built half the commercial buildings on Main Street, fixed roads after every bad winter. It was a good company, quiet, honest. But after Robert's heart attack, jobs had slipped. Clients had moved on. Ethan had come back to hold it together, not because he had a plan, but because it was his father's life's work and he wasn't ready to watch it disappear. The phone rang. Ethan picked it up. "Walker Construction," he said. The voice on the other end was a man named Hector Reyes. He spoke fast in that particular way that people speak when something has gone wrong and they need help immediately, and they're not sure if help is actually coming. "Mr. Walker, I work out at the Whitmore Ranch. A storm came through last night and it knocked out the old bridge over the creek on the east side of the property. We've got workers and livestock on the far side of that bridge. They can't get back. The equipment can't cross. We need someone who can assess the damage and shore up the crossing today. Is there any chance you're available?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. He heard Dale's voice in his head. "Stay away from the Whitmore Ranch." He heard Rudy's voice. "Bad news." He heard Patty's voice. "Not right. In here." And then he heard his own voice, the one he usually tried to ignore, the one that sounded uncomfortably like his father's, saying, "A bridge is a bridge. Workers need to get home. Animals need to get fed. That's not about anyone's reputation. That's just the job." "I'll be there in 45 minutes, Ethan said. The drive out to the Whitmore Ranch took him past the edge of town and onto a county road that narrowed gradually, the kind of road that makes you feel like the land is slowly taking back what was once borrowed. He drove for about 20 minutes before the turnoff appeared, marked by an old wooden sign that had seen better days. The letters were still readable. Whitmore Ranch, established 1947. He turned in. He drove up the long entrance road, and even though he told himself he wasn't going to make any judgments, wasn't going to arrive with an opinion already formed, the first thing he noticed was that the place looked tired. Not dirty. Not destroyed. Tired. The way something looks when it has been working very hard for a very long time with very little help. The fences were old but standing. The fields were dry but not dead. The barn needed paint. The main house had a porch with one broken step, but there were tools leaning against walls. There was a water trough recently filled. There were signs, small ones everywhere, that someone was out here every single day doing the work. He parked his truck. He got out. He walked to the front door of the house and knocked. There were 20 seconds of silence. Then the door opened. Ethan had no idea what he expected. Something harder, maybe. Something more in line with the stories. But the woman standing in the doorway of the Whitmore Ranch was not the person he had been warned about. She was 32 years old, maybe 33, with dark brown hair pulled back in a knot that had lost its shape hours ago. She was wearing work clothes, old jeans, a worn flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her hands had cuts on them, fresh ones, the kind you get from fence wire or rough wood. Her face was calm, but her eyes had the look of someone who has been carrying a weight for so long they've forgotten what it felt like to put it down. She looked at him for a long moment. Not suspicious, not cold, just measuring. "You're from Walker Construction," she said. It wasn't a question. "I am," Ethan said. "Ethan Walker. Hector called this morning about the bridge." Claire nodded slowly. She stepped back to let him in, then seemed to think better of it, and stayed in the doorway instead. "Before we talk about the bridge," she said quietly, "I want to ask you something." "Okay," Ethan said. "Everyone in town warned you to stay away from me, didn't they?" He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to, because she was right and they both knew she was right, and lying would have been pointless. A small expression moved across her face then. Not a smile exactly, something older than a smile, something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. "I hoped you wouldn't listen," she said, and those 5 words landed differently than he expected. Not like a challenge, not like manipulation, like something someone says when they've been alone for so long that a single ordinary moment of being treated like a regular person feels like it might break them. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her, and she let him. "Tell me about the bridge," he finally said. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. They walked together to the east side of the property, past the barn, past a paddock where 2 horses stood quietly watching them pass past a section of fence that had been recently repaired with new wire that stood out against the old. Ethan noticed that. You notice things like that when you've been in construction a long time. The new wire meant she'd done it herself recently, and she'd done it correctly. "Storm came through around 2 in the morning, Claire said as they walked. "I heard it. The creek runs high this time of year, and the bridge footings have been weak on the south side for about a year. I've been meaning to have it assessed, but," she paused, "it's been hard to get contractors out here." "Hard why?" Ethan asked. She glanced at him sideways. "You know why," she said. He did. They reached the bridge. It was a wooden vehicle bridge about 30 feet across the creek, the kind of structure that was built with serious craftsmanship 60 years ago and had been maintained just enough to keep standing. The south footing had given way in the night, and the whole structure had tilted at a 10-degree angle, passable on foot if you were careful. Completely impassable for vehicles or animals. On the far side of the bridge, Ethan could see a small group of workers standing near an old tractor watching. There were also 6 cattle in a pen on the far bank, and from the way they were moving, they were stressed. "How long have they been over there?" Ethan asked. "Since midnight," Claire said. Hector was checking the creek level when it happened. He got 3 of the men out safely before it went. The others were already across. She crossed her arms, not defensively, just like someone managing the cold. "They've got water, and there's feed in the shed over there, but I need them back, and I need those cattle back." Ethan crouched down at the edge of the bank and looked at the footing situation. He could already see a workable approach. It wasn't simple, but it wasn't impossible. He needed to get the south footing temporarily supported, get the deck stabilized enough for a controlled crossing, and then do proper restoration work over the following week. "I can get them across today," he said. "Full repair will take a few days, maybe 4 depending on what I find when I get in there." He stood up and looked at her. "I'll need to bring materials and 2 of my guys," he said. "Can I use your phone to call the office?" "Of course," Claire said. Then she paused. "Mr. Walker." "Ethan," he said. "Ethan." She said it like she was trying out the sound of it. "Why did you come?" "Because you needed a bridge fixed," he said. "I called 4 other contractors before you," she said. "All of them said they couldn't take the job. 2 of them didn't give me a reason." He looked at her steadily. "I gave you a reason. You need a bridge fixed. That's my job." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the house, and he followed her. Inside the house, Ethan noticed the same thing he noticed outside. Not neglect, work. The kitchen table had paperwork stacked in neat piles. A handwritten ledger was open near the window. There were notes everywhere, handwritten precise, the kind of notes a person makes when they are managing something serious with limited resources. While he used her phone to call his office and arrange for his crew and materials to come out, he found himself glancing at the paperwork on the table. Not intrusively, just the way your eyes move when your hands are busy. And something caught his attention. A column of figures, payment records, and against several of the entries, instead of confirmation numbers, there were single words: delayed, pending, disputed. He finished the call and set the phone down. "Those payments," he said, nodding toward the table. He knew it was forward. He said it anyway. Claire turned. She looked at the table. Then she looked at him with an expression that was partly surprise and partly something that might have been relief at someone finally noticing. "The ranch has been having financial difficulty," she said carefully. "How long?" Ethan asked. She was quiet for a beat. "Since about 8 months after Thomas died," she said. 3 years ago." "What kind of difficulty?" Ethan asked. She picked up a pen from the table and set it back down, a small, controlled gesture, the kind people make when they're deciding how much truth to offer. "Payments that were supposed to come in didn't come in," she said. "Contracts that Thomas had negotiated were renegotiated after his death, by someone who had the authority to do so." She stopped. "Or claimed to." "Who?" Ethan asked. The word sat in the air for a second. Claire looked at him. "Richard Whitmore," she said. And there it was, the name that everyone in town said with respect and warmth, the name that had been attached in every single conversation Ethan had to the idea of progress and cleanup and doing the right thing. Richard Whitmore, Thomas's younger brother, the man who had apparently been going around town explaining that Claire had driven the ranch into the ground. "What does Richard say the contracts show?" Ethan asked. "He says Thomas modified them before he died," Claire said. Her voice stayed even, flat. Not because she was cold, but because this was clearly a conversation she had rehearsed through many sleepless nights. He says Thomas made changes that gave Richard authority to renegotiate terms on behalf of the estate. And you disagree with that? Thomas didn't make those changes, she said. He wouldn't have. He had just spent 6 months building those contracts. He was careful. He was precise, and he trusted me to run this place. Can you prove it? Ethan asked. She was quiet for too long. No, she said. Not yet. Ethan didn't say anything else. He had a bridge to fix. That was the job he came for, and he was going to do it. But something in him had shifted the way it does when you're building something and you realize the plans don't match what's actually in front of you. His crew arrived 40 minutes later. 2 men named Sal and Marcus both experienced both quiet, both exactly who you wanted on a job like this. They unloaded materials from the truck without fanfare, and Ethan walked them to the bridge and laid out the plan. While they worked on the south footing stabilization, Ethan walked the structure twice more, checking, measuring, understanding what they were dealing with. Hector came across on foot from the other side, moving carefully along the tilted deck, and shook Ethan's hand with the kind of grip that belongs to a man who has been doing hard labor for 30 years. "Thank you for coming," Hector said. "I wasn't sure anyone would." "Why not?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. Hector looked at him with an honest expression. "You know how it is. Miss Claire has been having a hard time getting help. People believe what they hear." "What do you hear?" Ethan asked him. Hector didn't hesitate. "I hear a woman who is here every single morning before the sun comes up. I hear a woman who knows every one of my workers by name and knows which ones have sick kids at home and which ones are saving up for something important. I hear a woman who cried when we had to let 2 men go last fall because the money wasn't there. And I hear a woman who personally drove food out to those men's families the same week we let them go." He paused. "That's what I hear." Ethan let that land. They worked through the afternoon. By 4 o'clock, the bridge was stable enough for a controlled crossing. Sal guided the workers across on foot 2 at a time. Marcus managed the cattle crossing with Hector's help, slow and patient the way you have to be with animals that are frightened. When the last cow crossed safely and the last worker shook Ethan's hand, there was a quiet moment at the bridge where Ethan just stood and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing that had been broken being put back into a working state. Claire was there. She had been there for the last hour, not interfering, not hovering, just watching, making sure her people were okay. When it was done, she walked up beside him at the edge of the creek. "Thank you," she said. "We'll be back tomorrow to start the real repairs," he said. 4 days of work, give or take." She nodded. Then she looked at the bridge for a moment. "Can I ask you something else?" she said. "Sure," he said. "Do you believe what they say about me?" He thought about how to answer that honestly. "I believe I know what I've seen today," he said, "and that's worth more to me than what I heard before I got here." She didn't say anything. She just looked at the creek below the bridge for a long moment, and Ethan had the sense that she was holding herself very still the way you do when something unexpected happens and you don't want to react in a way that might make it disappear. "I'll have coffee ready at 7 if your crew is starting early," she said finally, and walked back toward the house. Ethan watched her go, and then he stood there for a moment longer. Because in one afternoon, without planning it, without trying to, he had walked into a story that was much bigger than a bridge. He had driven to the Whitmore Ranch, expecting to find a difficult woman in a damaged structure. He found the damaged structure, but the woman was something else entirely. Over the next 3 days, Ethan and his crew rebuilt the bridge properly. They poured new concrete footings, replaced rotting deck boards, reinforced the side rails, installed a proper drainage channel along the south bank to redirect stormwater away from the structure. It was good work, honest work, the kind that would hold for another 30 years if properly maintained. And while they worked, Ethan kept his eyes open. He noticed things. He noticed that Hector ran a tight operation. The remaining workers were organized, dedicated, professional. They took care of the animals. They maintained equipment. They showed up on time and worked late without being asked. These were people who were loyal, not because they had no other options, but because they chose to be loyal. That said something about the person they were loyal to. He noticed that the financial situation was worse than Claire had let on. On the second day, he overheard a phone call she was having from the porch while his crew ate lunch. She kept her voice low, but not low enough. She was speaking to someone, a bank, a financial institution of some kind, and she was asking for more time, not desperately, steadily, with the controlled tone of someone who has been asking for more time for so long that they've learned how to do it without sounding like they're drowning. But they were drowning. He could hear it. He noticed that she never asked for sympathy. She was polite to his crew and left them to do their work without micromanaging. She answered every question he asked about the property directly and thoroughly. She had a precise memory for details, dates, numbers, contract terms. She knew her own situation with the kind of clarity that comes from having spent a long time sitting with it alone. On the third day, when only Ethan was there finishing a detail on the south rail, while Sal and Marcus loaded the truck, Claire came to the bridge with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one and leaned on the railing beside him without preamble. "Can I show you something?" she said. "Okay," he said. She led him to the barn, not the main structure, but a smaller secondary building at the back that looked like it had been used for storage. Inside, against the far wall, there were filing cabinets, old ones, 4 of them labeled with years on pieces of tape. She opened the third cabinet and pulled out a folder. Inside were copies of contracts, original versions, signed by Thomas Whitmore and the various counterparties. And then next to them, clipped with a paper clip, were pages that had clearly been printed more recently, modified versions. The changes were subtle, buried in the language, the kind of modifications you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for them. "I found these about a year after Thomas died," Claire said, "when the first payment didn't come in, and I tried to reference the original contracts to figure out why." Ethan looked at the documents. He was not a lawyer. He was not a financial expert. But he was a man who had signed a lot of contracts in his working life, and he understood what he was looking at. The modifications gave Richard Whitmore the authority to renegotiate any contract held by the Whitmore estate in the event of Thomas Whitmore's incapacitation or death. The original contracts had no such clause. Someone had added it after the fact. "You showed this to someone?" Ethan asked. "I showed it to a lawyer in Denver," she said. "He said the modifications appeared irregular, but proving they were added after signing would require forensic document analysis, and that costs money." "Money you don't have," Ethan said. "Money I don't have," she agreed. She said it without self-pity, just as a fact. He looked at her. "And Richard knows you have these?" he asked. "Richard knows I suspect him," she said. "But I don't think he knows I have copies of the originals. I found them in a box Thomas had stored here. I don't think Richard knows this cabinet exists." Ethan looked at the cabinet, then at the documents, then at Claire. "These alone might not be enough," he said. "I know," she said. "But they're a start," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you still here?" she said, not accusatorially, genuinely, with real curiosity. "You fixed the bridge. That was the job. You could invoice me and leave, and this wouldn't be your problem." He thought about that. He thought about the 6 weeks he'd spent back in Willow Creek, about picking up the pieces of his father's business, about what it felt like to come home to a place where people had already formed their opinions about what you were and what you were worth. "My father built this company for 22 years, Ethan said. "When he got sick and couldn't work, a few of his old clients went around saying he'd gone soft, that his work wasn't what it used to be, that they should have moved on sooner." He paused. None of them called to ask how he was. None of them asked what actually happened. He looked at her. "I know what it feels like when people make a decision about you without knowing your story." Claire looked at him for a long time. Then she looked back at the filing cabinet. "The person who matters most," she said quietly, "the one Thomas trusted, the one who knew him and worked beside him and helped him build all of this, is not me." She stopped. "It's Hector. Hector Reyes has worked this ranch for 19 years. He knows every detail. He knows what Thomas intended. He knows what was changed and when and why it doesn't make sense." "But nobody has asked him," Ethan said. "Nobody has come here and asked anything," Claire said, "except you." Ethan looked at the documents one more time. Then he made a decision that had nothing to do with construction and everything to do with who he was. "Can I come back Saturday?" he asked. "Not for work, just to talk." She looked at him carefully. "Why Saturday?" "Because I want to sit with Hector," he said, "and I want to go through these documents. And I want to understand what's actually happening here before it's too late to stop it." She was quiet for a breath. "Saturday," she said. "I'll have coffee at 7. He nodded. He carried the last of his tools to his truck. He drove back into Willow Creek. And as he pulled back onto Main Street and saw the familiar storefronts and the familiar faces in the windows and the town that had been so certain, so absolutely certain about who Claire Whitmore was, he felt something settle into place inside him. A quiet, heavy resolve. He had come back to Willow Creek to fix his father's company. But he was starting to understand that the thing most in need of repair in this town was not a building, it was the truth. Saturday came, and Ethan showed up at 7 exactly like he said he would. He noticed that Claire had noticed. She opened the door before he knocked, which meant she had been watching for his truck. She handed him a mug of coffee without asking how he took it black, same as yesterday. And that small thing told him she paid attention to details even when she had no reason to. Hector was already at the kitchen table. 19 years on that ranch had given Hector Reyes the kind of quiet authority that doesn't come from a title. It comes from being the person who shows up every single day, regardless of weather, regardless of circumstance, regardless of whether or not anyone notices. He was in his mid-50s with a thick gray streak running through his dark hair, and he had the hands of a man who had never once done work he was ashamed of. He looked at Ethan when he sat down. Not unfriendly, just careful. "Claire says you want to understand what happened here," Hector said. "I do," Ethan said. "Why?" Hector said, not rudely, just directly the way men who don't have time for games tend to speak. "Because I've been back in this town 6 weeks," Ethan said, "and in 6 weeks I've heard Claire's name spoken maybe 40 times and not once by someone who had actually been out here and talked to her." Hector looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Claire. Something passed between them, the kind of look shared between two people who have been each other's only witnesses for a very long time. "All right," Hector said. He pulled a chair out from the table and sat back in it. "What do you want to know?" "Start from the beginning," Ethan said. "Before Thomas died." Hector was quiet for a moment. He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and looked at the table. "Thomas Whitmore was a good man," he said. "Not perfect. Good. He cared about this land the way some people care about their children. He knew every acre of it. He knew which fields needed rest and which ones could take another season. He knew the cattle by name." He paused. He also knew his brother. "Meaning what?" Ethan asked. "Meaning Thomas was not blind about Richard," Hector said. "He knew Richard had ambitions. He knew Richard thought the ranch was being wasted, that the land could be worth more if it was developed or sold. They had that argument for years, long before Thomas got sick." "What changed when he got sick?" Ethan asked. Hector set his mug down. "Richard started coming around more often," he said. "At first it looked like family, like a brother coming to help. Thomas was ill, he needed surgery, he had months of recovery ahead of him. Richard came and said he wanted to help manage things. Claire was here too, doing everything, taking care of Thomas, taking care of the ranch, taking care of the workers. She couldn't be everywhere at once." He stopped. Claire was standing near the counter. She hadn't sat down. She was listening with the expression of someone who is hearing the story of their own life told by another person and finding it both accurate and painful. "Richard took advantage of that," Hector said. "He got access to the financial accounts because Thomas trusted him. He started making small changes, nothing obvious, nothing that would make Thomas suspicious. But I noticed." He tapped the table once with one finger. "I noticed because I've been running the operational side of this ranch for 19 years, and I know what things cost and what things are supposed to cost, and the numbers started not adding up." "Did you tell Thomas?" Ethan asked. "I tried," Hector said, and the weight in those 2 words was considerable. Thomas was sick. He was in and out of the hospital. When he was home, he was managing pain and trying to stay present for Claire. I told him once in November of the year before he died that I thought the supply contracts had been renegotiated without our knowledge." "What did he say?" Ethan asked. Hector was quiet. "He said he would look into it," he said, "but he didn't have much time left by then." The kitchen was silent for a moment. Ethan looked at Claire. She was looking at the floor, just for a second. Then she looked back up. "Thomas died in March," she said quietly, continuing from where Hector had paused, as if they had told this story together, before in the dark, in this same kitchen, just the 2 of them. "And within 60 days of his death, Richard presented documents to the estate attorneys that gave him authority over the financial contracts. Documents that didn't exist in the originals, Ethan said. That's right, she said, and the attorneys didn't catch it. The attorneys Richard hired didn't catch it, she said, or didn't want to. That landed hard. Ethan sat with it for a moment. So, Richard has been systematically redirecting income from the ranch, Ethan said, thinking out loud now. Blocking payments, renegotiating contracts in ways that starve the operation. Why not just make an offer on the property? Claire crossed her arms. Because if he makes an offer, I can say no, she said. But if the ranch fails financially, if I can't keep the operation going eventually, I'll have no choice. I'll have to sell. And he'll be waiting. She paused. And the price will be whatever he decides it is, because by then I'll be desperate. How long does the ranch have? Ethan asked. She didn't answer immediately. Hector answered for her. At the current rate, Hector said, we have about 5 months before we can't make payroll. Ethan absorbed that. 5 months, 12 families, and a woman who had been carrying this alone for 3 years while the entire town stood outside and told stories about her character. He looked down at the folder of documents that Claire had placed on the table between them, the originals and the modified versions side by side. I want to go through all of these, he said. Every page. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been signing construction contracts for 12 years and I know how to read them, and I want to understand exactly what Richard changed and when. Hector leaned forward. You're serious about this, he said. I'm serious about this, Ethan said. They spent the next 3 hours at that kitchen table. Ethan, Claire, and Hector, going through every document in that filing cabinet page by page, creating a timeline of changes. Ethan had a legal pad and a pen, and he wrote everything down in his precise, economical handwriting, the kind of notes you take when you know they might matter later. What they found was methodical, careful, and damning. Across 14 separate contracts spanning 3 years, there were modifications that all shared one characteristic. They all redirected authority or income in Richard Whitmore's direction. Some were direct, some were subtle, some were buried in amendment clauses that referenced other documents that themselves contained earlier modifications. It was the kind of paperwork strategy that assumed nobody would take the time to trace it back to its source. Richard had bet on exhaustion. He had bet that Claire, grieving and isolated and outnumbered, would eventually run out of energy before she ran out of land. He had almost been right. Around 10 o'clock, Hector stood up and said he needed to check on the east field and he would be back in an hour. When he left, the kitchen was quiet for a moment. Ethan kept writing. Claire stood up and refilled both their mugs without being asked. She set his mug down in front of him. You should know something, she said. She sat back down across from him. When Thomas was in the hospital the last time, the week before he died, he asked to speak to me alone. Richard was there every day, hovering. The nurses thought it was touching. I knew it wasn't. Ethan set his pen down. What did Thomas say? He asked. She looked at her hands. He said he had written something, she said. A letter. He said he had written down everything he knew and everything he suspected about Richard and everything he wanted for this ranch. He said he had given it to someone he trusted to keep it safe. She stopped. He died 3 days later before he told me who. The weight of that sat between them like a third person at the table. You've been looking for the letter, Ethan said. For 3 years, she said. Who did Thomas trust? Ethan asked. Who were the people closest to him? Hector, she said immediately. His attorney, a man named Gerald Payne, who died 18 months ago. And, she hesitated, and my father-in-law, Thomas's father. His name is Walter Whitmore. He's 81 years old and he lives in a care facility in Grand Junction. Does Richard control his affairs? Ethan asked. Richard controls everything, she said. Have you spoken to Walter directly? Ethan asked. She looked at him steadily. Richard has made that very difficult, she said. The facility follows Richard's instructions because he's listed as the primary family contact. When I've tried to visit, there's always been a reason I can't. Walter isn't well. Walter is resting. Walter had a difficult week, and the staff thought it was best to limit visitors. Ethan was quiet. Claire, he said, and it was the first time he'd used just her name without a title in front of it, and something in the air between them shifted almost imperceptibly. "Do you think Walter has the letter?" She looked at him for a long time. "I think Thomas would have trusted his father above anyone else," she said. "And I think if Walter has it, Richard doesn't know. Because if Richard knew, that letter would have disappeared a long time ago." Ethan picked up his pen again. He wrote Walter Whitmore, Grand Junction, at the bottom of the legal pad and drew a circle around it. That afternoon when he drove back into Willow Creek, he stopped at the gas station again. Not for gas. He parked and sat in his truck for a few minutes, looking at the town around him. The same people, the same stories, the same quiet certainty about who everyone was and what they deserved. And for the first time since coming back, he felt genuinely angry, not at anyone in particular, at the ease of it, at how simple it was for an entire community to decide that a grieving woman was the villain in her own story without asking a single question, without one person driving out to that ranch and spending 3 hours at a kitchen table and looking at what was actually there. He started his truck and drove to his father's house. Robert Walker was sitting in the living room in the armchair where he spent most of his days since the heart attack. He was thinner than he used to be, and he tired easily, but his mind was still exactly what it had always been. Sharp, practical, unimpressed by nonsense. "You were out at the Whitmore Ranch again," Robert said. It wasn't a question. He was looking at the legal pad in Ethan's hand. "I was," Ethan said. He sat down on the couch across from his father. "Dad, do you know Richard Whitmore?" Robert looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. "I've known Richard Whitmore for 20 years, Robert said carefully. "What do you think of him?" Ethan asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. He adjusted his position in the chair, the slow movement of a man managing discomfort. Then he said, "I think Richard Whitmore is the kind of man who is very good at making sure everyone around him feels like they owe him something." "Has he ever approached you?" Ethan asked. "About work contracts?" "He referred 2 jobs to me years ago," Robert said. "Before you came back. I was grateful at the time." He paused. "And then when I got sick and things got slow, he was the first person to move his business to another company." He looked at Ethan. "I didn't think much of it at the time. That's business. But I noticed." "He told me last week that I should be careful about damaging my reputation," Ethan said, "that he controls contracts in this county." Robert sat forward. "He said that to you?" "Outside the office," Ethan said. Robert's expression changed. Something old and careful moved behind his eyes. "What are you involved in, son?" he asked. "The truth," Ethan said. "Or trying to find it." He put the legal pad on the coffee table and slid it across to his father. Robert picked it up. He read slowly. He turned pages. He was quiet for a long time. When he set it down, he looked at his son. "This is serious," Robert said. "I know," Ethan said. "If Richard finds out you're doing this, he will come after the company," Robert said. "I know that too," Ethan said. Robert looked at him. "Tell me everything," he said. So Ethan told him. All of it. From the morning Hector called to the bridge, repair to the kitchen table, to the filing cabinet, to the letter Thomas had written that no one had been able to find. He told it the way he told things to his father, straight through, without decoration. And Robert listened the way he always listened, without interrupting, without reacting until the story was finished. When it was done, Robert sat quietly for almost a full minute. Then he said, "Walter Whitmore." "You know him?" Ethan asked. "I've met him," Robert said. "Years ago. At a county fair, I think. He was a quiet man, dignified, the kind of man who says less than he knows." He paused. "I didn't know he was in Grand Junction." "Richard put him there," Ethan said, "and controls his access." Robert nodded slowly. "If Thomas gave that letter to anyone," Robert said, "it would be his father." "That's what Claire thinks," Ethan said. Robert looked at his son for a long moment. The late afternoon light was coming through the window, and it fell across Robert's face in a way that made him look both older and more himself than he had in months. "How do you feel about this woman?" Robert asked. Ethan looked at him. "I feel like she's the most unfairly treated person I've encountered in a long time," Ethan said. Robert smiled slightly. "That's not what I asked," he said. Ethan looked at the coffee table. "I feel like she deserves someone in her corner," he said, "and I feel like I'm in a position to be that." Robert nodded. "Then don't do it halfway," he said. "If you're in it, be in it." The following Tuesday, Richard Whitmore walked into Ethan's construction office. Ethan was alone. Sal and Marcus were on a job across town. The office was small, just a front room with a desk and a drafting table and 2 chairs for clients, and Richard Whitmore filled the doorway in the way that certain men do not, because of their physical size, but because of the space their confidence takes up. Richard was in his late 50s, silver-haired, well-dressed in the casual way that men with money dress, casually, everything fitting just a little too well to be accidental. He had a broad, easy smile, the kind of smile that had spent decades being trusted. "Ethan Walker," he said, like they were old friends. "Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said. He didn't stand up. Richard looked around the office in the way of a man cataloging what he sees and assigning value to it. "Nice setup," he said. "Your father built a good reputation here. I hope you can maintain it." "I plan to," Ethan said. Richard sat in one of the client chairs without being invited to. He rested one arm along the back of it in a pose of practiced relaxation. "I heard you've been out at the Whitmore Ranch," Richard said. "Bridge work." "That's right," Ethan said. "Finished job," Richard said. "The bridge is done," Ethan said. "There may be some additional work on the property." Richard looked at him with the smile still in place. "I'd encourage you to think carefully about ongoing involvement out there," Richard said. "I have genuine concern for you, Ethan. That property is in a complicated legal situation. You wouldn't want to be drawn into it." "What kind of complicated situation?" Ethan asked, straightforwardly, like a man asking about a load-bearing wall. Richard's smile adjusted slightly. "Financial disputes," he said. "Estate matters. These things get messy, and contractors who work on properties involved in disputes sometimes find themselves waiting a long time to get paid." "I appreciate the concern," Ethan said. "I'll make sure my contracts are in order." Richard looked at him. The smile was still there, but the warmth had gone out of it, the way light goes out of a room when someone shuts a door. "I've worked with a lot of people in this county," Richard said quietly. "I have relationships with most of the major developers and project managers, the kind of relationships that generate consistent work for construction firms." He paused. "I'd hate to see a promising company struggle because of association with the wrong situation." He was not being subtle. Ethan looked at him steadily. "I appreciate you stopping by," Ethan said. Richard sat still for one more moment, looking at Ethan the way a man looks at something he's trying to decide whether to push harder or let go for now. He stood up. "Give my regards to your father," he said. "I hope his recovery is going well." He left. Ethan sat at his desk for a long moment after the door closed. His hands were flat on the desk surface, and he was making a conscious effort to keep his breathing even. Because what he felt in that moment was not fear. It was something much more clarifying than fear. He reached for the phone and called Claire. She answered on the second ring. "Richard just came to my office," Ethan said. A silence. "What did he say?" she asked. "He suggested I should be careful about my business relationships," Ethan said. He made it sound like friendly advice. Another silence. "Ethan," she said. And there was something different in the way she said his name now than the first time she had said it. Something like wait, something like concern that was not about herself. "You don't have to do this. This is not your problem. You have a company to run and your father to take care of, and I don't want to be the reason something bad happens to you." He listened to her say all of that. Then he said, "Did Thomas's letter have a date on it, do you know?" A pause. "Thomas mentioned it was dated the week before he died," she said. "So early March 3 years ago." "All right," he said. "I'm going to Grand Junction on Thursday." The silence that followed was so complete that he could hear her breathing. "To see Walter," she said. "To see Walter," he said. "Ethan." Her voice was very quiet. "If Richard finds out you went there, he'll know we're building a case." "Then we'd better move fast," he said. She was quiet. "I want to come with you," she said. "I was going to ask if you would," he said. Thursday morning, Ethan picked Claire up at the ranch at 5:30 in the morning. She was waiting outside when he pulled up, which told him she hadn't slept. She was carrying a folder, which told him she'd been preparing. They drove west toward Grand Junction in the dark, with the mountains gradually becoming visible on either side of them, and very little conversation for the first half hour. Not because there was nothing to say, but because they were both in the particular focused quiet that comes before something that matters. About 40 minutes into the drive, Claire said, "Walter used to call me every Sunday." Ethan glanced at her. "Before everything happened," she said. "Before Thomas died. He called every Sunday morning early, and he and Thomas would talk for an hour. And sometimes Thomas would hand me the phone, and Walter would ask me how I was, and how the horses were, and whether I was eating enough." She paused. "He was kind to me, from the very beginning, when a lot of Thomas's family wasn't sure about me." "What do you mean wasn't sure?" Ethan asked. "Thomas was from an old family," she said. "Established. And I was not. I was a school teacher's daughter from a small town in Kansas. I had no money, no connections, no ranch history. Some people thought Thomas had made a mistake." She looked out the window. "Richard was polite to my face, and I always knew it meant nothing." "But Walter was different," Ethan said. "Walter told me once. She said that the most important thing about a person was whether they showed up. That's all he cared about. Did you show up when it was hard? And he said I showed up." She stopped. "I haven't been able to talk to him in 2 years." Ethan gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. 2 years, an 81-year-old man isolated in a care facility, cut off from the woman his son had loved and trusted, while his other son dismantled everything the first son had built. They arrived at the care facility just before 9 in the morning. It was a clean facility, well-maintained, the kind of place that looked good from the outside, in the way that you had to look more carefully to understand what was actually happening inside. Ethan had called ahead, not as himself. He had called as a contractor who had previously done work on the Whitmore family properties and wanted to pay a visit to an old family friend. It was not entirely a lie. It was the particular kind of truth that you construct when the real truth would close the door before you could walk through it. The facility manager, a woman named Donna, met them at the front desk. She was pleasant and professional, and the moment she saw Claire, her expression shifted, just slightly, a recognition maybe, or a memory of an instruction. "I'm sorry," Donna said. "I see that Claire Whitmore is listed in our guest log as requiring prior approval from the primary family contact." "I'm not here as a family member," Claire said calmly. "I'm accompanying Mr. Walker, who is here as a business associate of the Whitmore family." Donna looked between them. Ethan stepped forward slightly. "We won't take much of Walter's time," he said. 20 minutes. He can ask us to leave whenever he likes." Donna was quiet for a moment. She was a woman who followed procedures because procedures made sense in a place like this, a place responsible for vulnerable people. But she was also, Ethan sensed, a person with her own set of values underneath the procedures. "Walter has been asking about his daughter-in-law," Donna said quietly. Not officially, just as a statement of fact, almost to herself. "He asks the staff about her sometimes." She picked up a visitor badge. 20 minutes, she said. Walter Whitmore was smaller than Ethan expected, not diminished in spirit, but physically compact, the kind of man who had been lean his whole life and leaner with age. He was sitting in a chair near the window when they came in, reading a newspaper with glasses that sat low on his nose, and when he looked up, everything else in the room seemed to stop. He looked at Claire. Claire looked at him. And for a moment, they just looked at each other across the room. A small room in a care facility in Grand Junction, 2 years of silence between them. Then Walter said, "Claire," just her name, like a door opening. She crossed the room and took both his hands in hers, and for a moment she just held them, and Walter looked at her with the expression of a man for whom a very long wait has finally ended. "I've been trying to come," she said softly. "They kept telling me you weren't well enough." "I've been perfectly fine," Walter said with a sharpness that made it clear he was still entirely present. "They've been telling me you didn't want to visit." He paused. "I knew that wasn't true." He looked at Ethan. "Who is this?" he asked. "His name is Ethan Walker," Claire said. "He's been helping me." Walter looked at Ethan with the unhurried assessment of a man who had spent 81 years deciding who was worth trusting. "Walker," he said. "Robert Walker's son." "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "Good man, Robert," Walter said. Honest. He looked back at Claire. Sit down, both of you. Tell me what's happening. Claire sat across from him and told him. She was direct and precise, and she did not spare him the difficult details which told Ethan she understood that Walter was the kind of man who would rather know the truth than be protected from it. She told him about the contracts, about the payments that had been stopped, about the ranch's financial situation, about the 12 families, about the 5 months. Walter listened with his hands folded in his lap and an expression that moved from concern to anger to a settled, quiet fury that was far more alarming than noise would have been. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Thomas knew." "Yes," Claire said. "He told me," Walter said, "the week before he died. He called me." He stopped and looked at the window. He was already very weak, but he was clear. He told me Richard was going to try to take the ranch. He told me he had written it all down. He looked at Claire. "He told me you would know what to do with it." Claire was absolutely still. "Walter," she said, "do you have the letter?" Walter reached over to the nightstand beside his chair. He opened the single drawer, and from underneath a worn Bible and a collection of family photographs, he removed an envelope. It was sealed, faded slightly with time, written on the front in handwriting that Claire clearly recognized because the moment she saw it, her hand came up to her mouth. Thomas Whitmore's handwriting, addressed to no one, meant for someone who would know when the time came. Walter held it out to her. "He gave it to me when I visited him in the hospital," Walter said. "He made me promise to keep it until it was needed." He looked at Claire with eyes that were absolutely clear. "I think it's needed now." Claire took the envelope. She held it carefully, the way you hold something that has been waiting a long time. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "He didn't tell me he gave it to you." "He didn't want Richard to be able to pressure you into asking for it before you had the evidence to back it up," Walter said. "He thought if you didn't know where it was, you'd be safer." Ethan sat with that for a moment. Thomas Whitmore, in his last days, sick and in pain, had been thinking several steps ahead, had been protecting his wife not just with words in a letter, but with the logistics of where that letter lived and who held it, had trusted his father to be the keeper and trusted his wife to eventually find her way to him. That was a man who believed in Claire Whitmore when no one else did. "We should go," Ethan said quietly. He looked at Walter. "Sir, I want to be straight with you. When Richard finds out we were here, he may try to limit your contact further." Walter smiled for the first time. It was a small, dry smile. "I'm 81 years old," Walter said. "I've watched my younger son spend 30 years doing things I'm ashamed of and pretending they were acceptable. I have been patient long enough." He looked at Ethan. "You take care of her, and you take care of that ranch. It is the best of what Thomas built, and it does not belong to Richard." Ethan nodded. They said goodbye. Claire hugged Walter for a long moment, and Ethan waited near the door and looked away, because some things belong only to the people inside them. In the car driving back, the envelope sat on the console between them like a presence. Neither of them opened it. That felt right. It felt like something that should be opened once deliberately when the moment was correct. They were an hour outside of Willow Creek when Claire said, "I keep thinking about what Thomas was doing in those last days." "What do you mean?" Ethan asked. "He was dying," she said. "He was in pain. He was frightened. I know he was, even though he never showed it. And instead of spending every bit of energy he had left on himself on being comfortable on making his own peace, he was." She stopped. She looked out the window. "He was building something for me to find later. He was planting things for after he was gone." She was quiet. "What kind of person does that—" "The kind who loved you," Ethan said. She didn't say anything for a long time after that. The lights of Willow Creek appeared ahead of them in the early evening dark, the small grid of a small town, and Ethan drove toward them with the envelope on the console and the weight of what they had found and what it was going to cost them both to use it. Because Richard would find out. Richard always found out. And when he did whatever he had been doing slowly and carefully for 3 years, he was going to start doing quickly. Ethan's phone rang as they pulled onto Main Street. He answered it. It was Sal. "Boss," Sal said, and something in his voice was wrong immediately. "I just got a call from the county office. Our permit on the Henderson project just got flagged for review. They're saying there may be a compliance issue." Ethan kept his voice even. "What compliance issue?" he said. "They couldn't give me details," Sal said. "They just said someone filed a complaint and there's going to be an inspection." Ethan looked straight ahead at the road. "All right," he said. "I'll handle it." He ended the call. He looked at Claire. She was looking at him. "He already knows," she said. It wasn't a question. "Probably," Ethan said. "Then we don't have as much time as I thought," she said. "No," Ethan said. "We don't." She looked down at the envelope. "Tonight," she said. "We open it tonight." They opened the envelope at Ethan's kitchen table at 9:47 that night. Not at the ranch. Ethan had made that call quietly on the drive back. If Richard already knew they had been to Grand Junction, and the phone call from Sal suggested he had eyes somewhere close, then the ranch was the first place someone might come looking. Ethan's house on Birch Street was quieter, smaller, less expected. Robert was still awake when they arrived, which did not surprise Ethan. His father had the particular stubbornness of men who refused to be managed, and when Ethan had called ahead and said he was bringing Claire Whitmore and something important had happened, Robert had simply said he would put on coffee. He shook Claire's hand when she walked in, firmly with both of his, the way he shook hands with people he had decided to take seriously. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He poured 3 mugs of coffee and sat down at the table and waited. Claire set the envelope in the center of the table. For a moment, no one touched it. Then Claire picked it up, carefully broke the seal, and drew out 6 pages of handwritten paper. Thomas Whitmore's handwriting was precise and deliberate, the kind of writing that belongs to a man who treated words like measurements, each one placed exactly where it needed to be. The pages were dated March 4th, 3 years ago, 11 days before Thomas died. Claire read it first, silently. Her face stayed almost completely still while she read, which Ethan understood was not a sign that she felt nothing. It was the opposite. It was the expression of a person feeling too much to let any single emotion take the surface. When she finished the last page, she set it down. She pressed both hands flat on the table. She breathed. Then she looked up at Ethan and his father with eyes that were not crying, but were very close to it, and she said, "He knew everything." She passed the pages to Ethan. He read. Robert leaned in beside him and read at the same time, and the kitchen was completely quiet except for the sound of the clock on the wall and the very occasional sound of one of them drawing a breath. Thomas's letter was extraordinary, not because it was dramatic, because it was precise, because in the 11 days before he died, Thomas Whitmore had written down in careful order every transaction he had discovered, every contract clause he believed had been altered, every conversation with Richard that had felt wrong, every name of every person who had been present at meetings he now questioned. He had written the name of a second attorney, a woman named Patricia Garza in Denver, whom he had contacted 2 weeks before his death to request a forensic review of the contract documents. He had written that he believed Patricia Garza had received copies of the original contracts before he died. He had written in plain language that Richard had approached him while he was in the hospital and asked him to sign a document granting Richard authority over estate finances in the event of Thomas's death or incapacitation. Thomas had refused. He had written that he believed Richard had found another way to get what he wanted after that refusal. And at the end of the letter, in a paragraph that stood apart from the rest, Thomas had written directly to Claire. Ethan stopped when he reached it. He looked at Claire. "Do you want to read this part alone?" he asked. She shook her head. So he read it. Robert read it beside him, and neither of them said a word until it was done. Thomas had written that he was not afraid of dying, but that he was afraid of leaving Claire without what she needed to protect herself. He wrote that he had been a better rancher than he had been a husband, that he had let the business consume too much of the time he should have spent simply being with her, and that he hoped she would forgive him for that. He wrote that she was the most capable and clear-hearted person he had ever known, and that the ranch was in better hands with her than it had ever been in his. He wrote that he loved her. He wrote that he was sorry he couldn't stay. Then he wrote, "Patricia Garza has copies of everything. She is waiting for you to call her. She will know what to do." Ethan set the letter down. He looked at Claire. She was looking at the table. He knew about Patricia Garza, Ethan said quietly. He set that up before he died. You've had a forensic document attorney waiting for 3 years and you didn't know it. Claire nodded very slowly. He planned it, she said. He planned all of it. Even at the end, even when he was that sick he was. She stopped. She pressed one hand against her mouth for a moment. Then she lowered it and looked at Ethan. He was building me a road. Robert, who had been quiet since they sat down, cleared his throat. It's almost 10 o'clock, he said. But in the morning, this Patricia Garza needs to be the first call you make. I agree, Ethan said. Do you think she still has the documents? Claire asked. After 3 years, if Thomas asked her to hold them, Ethan said she held them. Claire looked at the letter for a long moment. Then she said, What about Richard? If he finds out about the letter about Patricia, he'll move to block everything. He has lawyers. He has money. He'll find a way to slow this down long enough to finish what he started. Ethan looked at his father. Robert was looking at the letter with an expression Ethan recognized. It was the expression his father wore when he was assessing a structure and deciding whether it would hold. He's going to find out regardless, Robert said. The question is whether you're far enough ahead of him when he does. He looked at Ethan. How much time do you think you have before he moves on the ranch directly? Based on tonight's permit complaint, not much, Ethan said. A week, maybe 2. Then we don't sit on this, Robert said. Ethan looked at Claire. I want to call Patricia Garza tonight, he said. Even if it's late, I want to leave a message. I want her to have it first thing in the morning. Claire nodded. Ethan picked up his phone. He found the number for Patricia Garza's law office in Denver through a directory search. It was 20 minutes past 10. He called anyway. He expected voicemail. What he got was something else. The phone rang 4 times and then a woman's voice answered. Alert, professional, not groggy. Garza Law, she said. Ms. Garza. Ethan said, My name is Ethan Walker. I'm calling on behalf of Claire Whitmore. We have a letter from Thomas Whitmore dated March 4th, 3 years ago. In it, Thomas says you have copies of original contracts from the Whitmore estate. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. Where are you calling from? Patricia Garza asked. Willow Creek, Colorado, Ethan said. Another pause. I've been waiting for this call for 3 years, she said. I began to wonder if anyone was going to make it. Ethan exhaled slowly. We're making it now, he said. Can Claire Whitmore confirm authorization? Patricia said. Ethan passed the phone across the table. Claire took it, held it with both hands. Ms. Garza, she said. This is Claire Whitmore. Ethan watched Claire's face as she listened. He watched the tension that had lived in her jaw and her shoulders for as long as he'd known her, which was only a few weeks but felt longer. He watched it shift, not disappear, but change shape. From the tension of someone fighting alone to something closer to the tension of someone who has finally found solid ground under their feet and is still adjusting to what that feels like. Claire talked to Patricia Garza for 11 minutes. When she set the phone down on the table, she sat very still for a moment. She has everything, Claire said. Originals, copies her own forensic analysis, and an affidavit she prepared 3 years ago based on Thomas's instructions. She stopped. She says the evidence is substantial. She says she can be in Willow Creek by Friday. Robert put his coffee mug down on the table with a sound that in the context of the quiet room was almost like a punctuation mark. Friday, he said. Friday, Claire said. That gives Richard 4 days, Ethan said. And then as if the universe had decided to confirm that point immediately, Ethan's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He answered it. Walker, he said. The voice on the other end was calm and measured and instantly recognizable. Richard Whitmore. It's late, Ethan, Richard said in the tone of a man who considers calling you at 10:30 at night perfectly reasonable. I heard you took a drive today. Long one. Ethan didn't respond. Grand Junction is a nice area, Richard said. I hope the visit was worthwhile. Is there something I can help you with, Mr. Whitmore? Ethan said. I just want to make sure we understand each other, Richard said. The pleasant tone was still there, but underneath it was something that had been there the whole time, something harder, something that had always known exactly what it wanted. You're a smart man. You have a company to protect. a father to take care of. These are things worth protecting. Ethan looked at Claire across the table. She was watching him, calm, waiting. "I appreciate the call," Ethan said. "I also want you to know," Richard said, "that if you intend to pursue whatever it is you think you're pursuing, I will have no choice but to respond in kind. I have been patient with this situation for a long time because I have respect for what Thomas built, but patience has limits. So does my interest in this conversation," Ethan said. A silence. Then Richard said very quietly, "Don't make an enemy of me, Ethan." "Good night, Mr. Whitmore," Ethan said, and ended the call. He set the phone on the table. Robert was looking at him. Claire was looking at him. Neither of them said anything. "He knows we went to Grand Junction," Ethan said. "He may not know about Walter yet. He definitely doesn't know about the letter." "How long before he figures out about Walter?" Claire asked. "He'll call the facility tomorrow morning," Ethan said, "which means he'll know by 8 o'clock. Claire stood up. She picked up the letter and held it carefully. "I need to go back to the ranch," she said. "I need to be there when Hector opens in the morning. If Richard decides to accelerate things on the property side, I need to be present." "I'll drive you," Ethan said. "You don't have to," she said. "I know," he said. They drove out to this ranch just before midnight. The road was dark and empty, and the mountains were only shapes against a slightly less dark sky. They didn't talk much on the drive out. There was too much to think about for conversation to add anything. When they reached the ranch entrance, Ethan slowed but didn't stop. "I'm going to check the property perimeter before I leave," he said. "Ethan," she said. "It's late and you're here alone, and Richard just called me," he said simply. She didn't argue with that. He drove slowly around the outer fence line of the main property. Everything looked as it should. The barn was locked. The equipment shed was locked. The cattle were settled. When he pulled back to the front of the house and stopped the truck, Claire opened the passenger door and then paused. She turned back. "Thank you," she said. And it was different from the thank yous before. Those had been for the bridge work, for the documents, for showing up. This one was for something harder to name, something that had been accumulating over weeks. "Get some sleep," he said. "You too," she said. She got out. He waited until she was inside and the porch light came on before he drove back down the ranch road. Wednesday morning hit, like something had already been decided overnight. Ethan arrived at his office at 7 to find a certified letter from the county building department confirming a formal compliance review of the Henderson project permit. It was procedurally routine, but it would delay the project by at least 2 weeks and cost him a penalty if any violation was found. He read it once, set it aside, and called his lawyer a straightforward man named Jim Alcott, who had handled Robert Walker's legal work for 15 years. Jim said he'd look into it. Ethan said he also needed to know about county meeting procedures, specifically whether a property dispute of the kind involving the Whitmore Ranch could be brought before the county commissioner's regular public meeting. Jim was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual move," Jim said. "I know," Ethan said. "If you bring something like this to a public meeting, it becomes public record," Jim said. "You can't control who sees it or what they do with it." "That's exactly why I want to do it," Ethan said. Another pause. "The next regular meeting is 10 days away," Jim said. "Can we get on the agenda?" Ethan asked. "With what?" Jim said. "Evidence of financial fraud in the administration of an estate," Ethan said. "Specifically the alteration of legal contracts after the signatory's death." The pause this time was longer. "Ethan," Jim said carefully, "if you're bringing that kind of allegation to a public meeting, you better have documentation that can stand on its own. We have the originals, the modified versions of forensic attorney's affidavit, and a handwritten letter from Thomas Whitmore dated 11 days before his death, detailing the fraud," Ethan said. "Will that do?" Jim was quiet for a full 10 seconds. "I'll get you on the agenda," he said. That was Wednesday morning. What happened by Wednesday afternoon demonstrated exactly how quickly Richard Whitmore could move when he felt threatened. Ethan was at the Henderson project site, reviewing the structural issue the permit review had flagged a completely valid piece of work his crew had done correctly, when Sal called him over to where a man in a county official's jacket was standing near the foundation. "He's from the inspector's office," Sal said quietly. "He says he has questions." Ethan walked over. The inspector was professional, careful, and clearly uncomfortable. He showed Ethan a specific section of the permit review and pointed to a clause about soil assessment documentation that he said was missing from the original filing. "This document was filed," Ethan said. He said it clearly, not defensively, as a statement of fact. "I'm sure that's the case," the inspector said, "but it's not in the current file." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "Can I ask when the compliance review was initiated?" he said. "Yesterday evening," the inspector said. "Yesterday evening, hours after Richard Whitmore had called Ethan at 10:30 at night." Ethan thanked the inspector and called Jim Alcott again. "Someone removed a document from our county permit file," Ethan said. "That's a serious allegation," Jim said. "I have copies of everything we submitted," Ethan said. "I want those submitted to the county today, along with a formal complaint about the timing of this review." "I'll handle it," Jim said. By the time Ethan drove out to the ranch that afternoon, he had submitted the counter documentation, lodged the formal complaint, confirmed the public meeting agenda slot for the following Friday, and received a text from Patricia Garza in Denver, confirming she would arrive Thursday evening. Things were moving now. Fast in the particular way that things move when a situation that has been held in careful slow motion for years suddenly accelerates because someone has decided to end it. Hector met him at the barn door. "We had a visitor this morning," Hector said. He kept his voice low even though there was no one nearby. "Who?" Ethan asked. "A man from a real estate firm in Denver," Hector said. "He said he was conducting an independent property assessment. He had paperwork." "Did you let him in?" Ethan asked. "Claire told him to leave," Hector said. He said it with a look that suggested he had been very glad when she did. "But he took photographs from the entrance road before he left." "He's building a forced sale case," Ethan said, "documenting the condition of the property to establish a valuation. If Richard gets a court to agree the estate needs to be liquidated to settle debts, he can buy it at whatever valuation he's had assessed." Hector looked at him steadily. "Can he do that?" he said. "He's going to try," Ethan said. Inside, Claire was at the kitchen table with a legal pad of her own, now making lists in tight, precise handwriting. She looked up when Ethan came in. "Tell me," she said. He told her about the permit review, the missing document, the counter-filing, the public meeting. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Public meeting," she said. "In 10 days," Ethan said. "Patricia will be here tomorrow. We use the weekend to build the presentation. We go in front of the county commissioners with everything." "Richard will be there," she said. "That's the point," Ethan said. She looked at the table. "People in this town have made up their minds about me," she said. "You know that. Even with evidence, even with documents, there will be people in that room who will choose to believe Richard because they've known him for 30 years. "Some of them, yes," Ethan said, "but not all. And what this meeting does is create a public record. It puts the evidence in front of people who are not Richard's lawyers, not Richard's hand-picked advisors. It puts it in front of ordinary people who have known you and Thomas and this ranch their whole lives and have been told one story. They deserve to hear the other one." She looked at him for a long moment. "You believe that," she said. "You actually believe people can change their minds." "I believe some people were never given a real choice," he said. "They heard what they heard, and they had no reason to question it. That's different from someone who has seen the truth and chooses to ignore it." She looked at him carefully, the way she looked at things when she was deciding whether to trust them. "Okay," she said. "Okay." Patricia Garza arrived Thursday evening in a dark blue sedan and turned out to be exactly what the situation required, which was someone who combined meticulous legal precision with a complete absence of patience for anyone who tried to muddy the facts with irrelevant noise. She was in her early 50s, compact and efficient, and she shook Claire's hand with the directness of a person who had been waiting to do exactly that for a long time. "I'm glad you found the letter," she told Claire at the table. "Thomas told me it was with Walter. He told me if it never surfaced, it would mean Richard had found a way to prevent you from ever getting here." She paused. "I'm glad he was wrong about that possibility." "What do we have?" Ethan asked. Patricia opened her briefcase and laid out her materials with the systematic efficiency of someone who had organized this presentation in her head many times over 3 years. What they had was substantial. Patricia's forensic document analysis had identified physical and temporal inconsistencies in the modified contracts. The paper stock used in 2 of the critical amended pages did not match the paper stock in the rest of the documents, suggesting those pages had been added after the original signing. The ink analysis on the amendment clauses showed different aging patterns than the ink on the signature pages. These were not absolute proofs on their own, but in combination with the original contract language, Thomas's letter and the timeline Hector could testify to, they built a case that was not a suspicion. It was a picture, a clear one. "Will it stand up in court?" Claire asked. "In court, with time and resources, yes," Patricia said. "In a county commissioner's public meeting in 10 days, it will stand up in the court of public opinion, which in a small town often matters more in the short term." "And in the long term?" Ethan asked. "In the long term, we file a formal complaint with the state attorney general's office, and we pursue civil recovery," Patricia said. "But Richard needs to be stopped from completing the property valuation and initiating forced sale proceedings. The public meeting does that by creating scrutiny. Scrutiny is the one thing Richard cannot afford right now." "He'll try to stop the meeting," Claire said. "He'll try to discredit the evidence," Patricia said. "He'll say the letter is a forgery. He'll say my analysis is bought. He'll say Claire manipulated Thomas in his final days." "He'll say that last thing especially," Claire said, very quietly. "Yes," Patricia said. "He will, and we need to be ready for it." "How?" Ethan asked. Patricia looked at him. "We need witnesses," she said, "people who were present during the relevant period, people who can speak to Thomas's state of mind, his intentions, his relationship with Claire, people who knew the ranch operation and can testify to what changed after Richard took control." "Hector," Ethan said immediately. "Yes," Patricia said. "Who else?" "Walter," Claire said. "Walter Whitmore at a county meeting is powerful," Patricia said. "But we need to get him there. Can we do that?" Claire looked at Ethan. "Richard controls his access at the facility," Ethan said. "Walter is 81 years old and mentally competent," Patricia said. "Richard can restrict visitor access through the facility's internal policies, but he cannot legally prevent Walter from leaving if Walter chooses to leave." "Does Walter know what we're doing?" Claire asked. "Not yet," Ethan said. "Then we need to call him," Claire said. Ethan reached for his phone. The call to Walter Whitmore's room at the Grand Junction facility went through the facility's main line, and this time the person who answered was not Donna. It was a different staff member, one who put him on hold for 4 minutes before coming back to say that Mr. Whitmore was not available for calls this evening. Ethan thanked her and hung up. He looked at Claire and Patricia. "He's been restricted," he said. "Since when?" Claire asked. "Since Richard found out we visited," Ethan said. The kitchen was quiet. Then Patricia said, "We need someone to go to Grand Junction tomorrow." "I'll go," Ethan said. "Not alone," Claire said. She was looking at him with an expression that mixed worry with resolve. "If Richard has flagged you at the facility, they'll stop you at the door." "Who else can go?" Ethan asked. "Me," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Robert Walker was standing in the kitchen doorway. He had driven himself out to the ranch, which he was not supposed to be doing yet, because his cardiologist had not cleared him for anything beyond light activity. He was leaning on the doorframe, and he looked tired but completely certain. "Dad," Ethan said, "you're not supposed to be driving." "I've known Walter Whitmore for 30 years, Robert said, as if this fully addressed the concern about his cardiac health. "He and I are old enough that nobody's going to stop 2 old men from sitting together in a facility common room." He looked at Claire. "I'll go tomorrow morning. I'll bring Walter out if he's willing." Claire stood up. "Mr. Walker," she said. "Robert," he said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has been alone in something very hard for a very long time and has just been unexpectedly offered help from a direction they weren't watching. "Thank you," she said. Robert waved it off. "Thomas Whitmore was a good man," he said. "I didn't know him well, but I knew him well enough. And a good man's life's work deserves a fair fight." He pulled a chair out and sat down. "Now catch me up. I want to know everything before morning." They worked until past 1 in the morning. Patricia laid out the evidence structure. Hector came in at 10 and spent an hour walking through the operational timeline with Patricia giving her the detailed witness account she needed. Robert listened to all of it and asked 3 questions, each one sharp and perfectly placed the questions of a man who had spent decades managing complexity in practical situations. When they finally stopped for the night, there was something in the room that had not been there at the beginning of the evening. Not confidence exactly. Something more earned than that. The feeling that comes when you have worked honestly and carefully with people who are doing the same, and the thing you are building is starting to look like it might hold. Ethan walked to his truck around 1:30. Claire walked out with him, which she didn't have to do. They stood near the truck for a moment in the dark. "How are you doing?" Ethan asked. Not about the case, just as a straightforward question from one person to another. She thought about it honestly. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for 3 years," she said, "and I can still feel myself holding it, but I think I can see where the air is." He looked at her for a moment. "You're going to have to stand up in front of that town," he said, "in front of people who have had a story about you for years. That's going to be hard." "I know," she said. "You're going to have to let them see you," he said. "Really see you. Not the version Richard made." She was quiet. "I've been invisible for so long," she said, "that I'm not sure I remember how to be visible." "You're visible to me," he said. He said it simply as a fact without making it more than it was or less. "You have been since the day you opened that door." She looked at him. Something moved across her face that was not quite a smile, but was close to the territory where smiles come from. "Get home safe," she said. He nodded. He got in his truck. And as he drove back down the ranch road, he thought about what Richard had set in motion that night on the phone, the threat, the certainty, the assumption that he was the only person who knew how things worked in Willow Creek, and therefore the only person who could determine how things ended. He thought about how the letter had sat with Walter for 3 years waiting, how Patricia Garza had maintained her files for 3 years waiting, how Claire had gotten up every morning for 3 years working, fighting, not surrendering, waiting. And he thought about how strange it was that a storm had knocked out a bridge on a specific morning, and a man named Hector had called a construction company he had never called before, and Ethan Walker, who had been back in this town for exactly 6 weeks, had picked up the phone instead of letting it ring. Small things, ordinary moments. And sometimes, ordinary moments are the hinge on which everything turns. He was pulling onto Birch Street when his phone lit up on the passenger seat, a text from a number he didn't recognize. He read it at the stop sign. It said, "You should know that Richard Whitmore filed an emergency injunction with the county this afternoon to block any agenda items related to the Whitmore estate at the upcoming public meeting. Hearing is tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Thought you should know. A friend." Ethan sat at the stop sign for a long moment. Then he called Jim Alcott. Jim answered on the 3rd ring, groggy with sleep. "He filed an injunction," Ethan said. "Tomorrow at 2. A pause. "I just saw it come through," Jim said. "I was going to call you in the morning." "Can we fight it?" Ethan asked. "We can appear at the hearing," Jim said. "We can argue against it. But if the judge grants it, we lose the meeting slot." "What judge?" Ethan asked. A longer pause. "Judge Harlan," Jim said. "He's been on the county bench for 12 years. "Does Richard know him?" Ethan asked. The pause that followed was the kind that answers the question without saying a word. "I'll be at the courthouse at 1:30 tomorrow," Jim said. "So will I," Ethan said. He put the truck in gear. He drove the remaining 2 blocks to his father's house. He sat in the parked truck in the driveway for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, thinking about Richard's move, precise, fast, designed to close the door before they could get through it. If the injunction was granted, the public meeting was blocked. If the public meeting was blocked, there was no public record, no scrutiny, no community accountability. Just Richard's lawyers and Richard's timeline and a ranch that would be sold before the spring. He thought about Claire standing at that door the first morning he came. He thought about Thomas sick and careful and building roads for the woman he loved to find after he was gone. He thought about Walter Whitmore in a care facility in Grand Junction, asking the staff about his daughter-in-law. He got out of the truck. He went inside. He set his alarm for 5 in the morning, because tomorrow was not the day to be slow. Ethan's alarm went off at 5 in the morning and he was already awake. He had slept maybe 2 hours, not from anxiety exactly, more from the particular alertness that takes over when your mind understands that the hours ahead are going to matter in a way that most hours don't. He lay in the dark for a few minutes, thinking through the sequence of the day. The injunction hearing at 2, Robert driving to Grand Junction at dawn, Patricia preparing the evidence response, Claire holding the ranch together while all of it moved around her like weather. He got up, made coffee, called Claire at 5:30. She answered immediately. "You saw the text about the injunction," she said, not a question. "Last night," he said. "Jim Alcott is going to fight it at the hearing. I'll be there." "I want to be there," she said. "Claire," he said carefully. "I know what you're going to say," she said, "that it might look like I'm pressuring the judge, that Richard's lawyers will use it. I know." A pause. "But I am not going to sit at this ranch and wait to find out if my life gets decided for me again. I'm done with that." He didn't argue. "Okay," he said. "I'll pick you up at noon." He spent the morning at the Henderson Project walking the site with Sal and making sure every document, every photograph, every time-stamped record of their correct work was organized in a folder that he left with Jim Alcott's office by 9 a.m. That was a separate battle, and it was not the one that mattered most today, but he was not going to let it slide. Richard had opened 2 fronts simultaneously. Ethan was going to hold both of them. At 10:15, Robert called from the road. "I'm 40 minutes out from Grand Junction," Robert said. He sounded better than he had any right to, considering he was a man his cardiologist wanted sitting in a chair. "I called the facility this morning, told them I was an old friend coming for a social visit. They didn't flag me." "Good," Ethan said. "Walter knows I'm coming," Robert asked. Claire called the facility at 7 and asked them to let Walter know a family friend named Robert Walker would be stopping by. Ethan said. "Donna was on the morning shift. She passed the message." "Good woman," Robert said. "Dad," Ethan said. "You don't have to get Walter there today. That's not the goal for today. The goal is to make contact and ask him if he's willing to come to the public meeting next Friday." "I understand the assignment," Robert said in the tone of a man who finds it mildly insulting to be told what the assignment is. Ethan smiled despite himself. "Call me when you're leaving," he said. At 11:30, Patricia Garza called from the hotel in town where she'd checked in the night before. "I've reviewed the injunction filing," she said. "Richard's argument is that the matter is an active estate dispute and therefore falls under the exclusive jurisdiction of the probate court, making the county commissioner meeting an inappropriate venue." "Is he right?" Ethan asked. "He's not entirely wrong," Patricia said with the careful precision of a lawyer. "But he's not entirely right either. The commissioner meeting is not being used to adjudicate the estate dispute. It's being used to present evidence of potential fraud to a public body that has oversight responsibilities. That's a different thing." "Can you make that argument in court today?" Ethan asked. "I can," she said, "but I'd like to be there." "Can you be there?" he asked. "I'll be there at 1:45, she said. Ethan picked up Claire at noon exactly. She was waiting outside the ranch house the same way she had been waiting the morning they drove to Grand Junction, which he was beginning to understand was simply how Claire operated. She was ready before the moment required her to be, because she had learned that the moment often arrived early. She got in the truck. She looked straight ahead for a moment. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked. "Like I'm about to walk into a room where someone is going to try very hard to make me disappear again," she said, "and like I'm going to have to stand very still and not let them." He pulled out of the ranch entrance and onto the county road. "You've been standing still under pressure for 3 years, he said. "You're good at it." She looked at him sideways. "Standing still and letting it happen is different from standing still and refusing to move," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is." They drove for a moment without talking. Then she said, "What do you think the judge will do?" "I think it depends on what kind of man he is," Ethan said honestly. "Jim Alcott knows him. Jim thinks he's procedurally careful but fair, which means if Patricia makes the argument clearly, he'll listen." "And if Richard's lawyers make it murkier than it needs to be," she said, "then we deal with that," he said. The county courthouse was a building Ethan had walked past his entire childhood without ever having a reason to go inside. It was a modest structure, the kind that county governments built in an era when public buildings were meant to look like they stood for something. The courtroom used for civil hearings was on the second floor, and when Ethan and Claire walked in at 1:48, there were already more people there than Ethan expected. He had expected Richard's lawyers. He had not expected the 8 other people sitting in the gallery. He recognized most of them. Dale Hutchins, his neighbor, Rudy from the gas station, 2 men he knew worked in county property management, a woman named Carol Stanton who sat on the town council, and in the second row, Patty from the diner still wearing her work apron like she had come directly from her shift. They were not there for any official reason. They were there because small towns always know when something is happening, even when no announcement has been made. News moves through Willow Creek the way water moves through soil invisibly and completely. Richard was already there, seated at the respondents' table with 2 lawyers Ethan didn't recognize. Denver lawyers from the look of their suits. Richard looked composed. He glanced at Claire when she walked in, and something moved across his face that was not quite surprise and not quite contempt. It was more like the expression of a man recalculating a number he thought he had already solved. Claire looked at him. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then she sat down. Patricia Garza arrived at 1:52 and sat beside Jim Alcott at the petitioner's table with her briefcase open before she was fully in the chair. Judge Harlan came in at 2 on the dot. He was a man in his late 60s, lean and straight, with reading glasses on a cord around his neck, and the air of someone who had sat in that chair long enough to recognize almost every tactic that could be tried in it. "This is an emergency injunction hearing in the matter of Whitmore Estate," he said without preamble. "I've reviewed the filing. Counsel for the petitioner, please proceed." Richard's lead attorney, a man named Schaefer, who spoke with the particular confidence of someone who bills by the hour and knows he is the most expensive person in the room, stood and made his argument. It was well organized and technically competent. The estate dispute was a probate matter. The county commissioner meeting was not the appropriate venue. Presenting evidence of alleged financial misconduct at a public governmental meeting could prejudice any future legal proceedings and constituted an attempt to try the matter outside its proper jurisdiction. It was a good argument. Judge Harlan listened to it without expression. Then he looked at Patricia. "Response," he said. Patricia stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She simply spoke with the precision of someone who has been waiting a very long time to say exactly this. "Your Honor, the petitioner mischaracterizes the purpose of the proposed county meeting agenda item," she said. "We are not asking the county commissioners to adjudicate a civil estate matter. We are presenting evidence of potential criminal fraud in the alteration of legal contracts to a public oversight body, which has both the right and the responsibility to receive such information. The appropriate jurisdiction for the estate dispute itself is not in question. What is in question is whether members of the public and their elected representatives are entitled to know that fraud may have been committed in their county using instruments of property and commerce that affect local families and local workers." She paused. 12 families, she said, who have worked Whitmore Ranch land for years, whose livelihoods depend on the ranch's continued operation. They are not parties to a probate case, they are citizens, and the evidence we intend to present at that meeting is not presented for legal adjudication. It is presented because they deserve to know the truth. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Harlan looked at Schaefer. "Rebuttal," he said. Schaefer made 2 additional points about legal precedent and jurisdictional boundaries. They were technically sound. They were also in that particular courtroom with those particular people in the gallery listening, missing the point in a way that everyone present could feel. Judge Harlan took off his reading glasses. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "The injunction is denied." Schaefer's composure held, but barely. Richard, sitting behind him, went very still. "I want to be clear," Judge Harlan said. "I am not making a determination about the underlying estate matter. That is for probate court. What I am determining is that a public meeting to present evidence of potential fraud to elected representatives does not constitute an improper legal proceeding. It constitutes civic engagement." He looked over the top of his glasses. Motion denied. We're adjourned. He stood. Everyone in the room stood. And in the 3 seconds between the judge standing and people beginning to move, Richard Whitmore turned in his seat and looked directly at Claire. Not at Ethan. Not at Patricia. At Claire. And Claire, sitting very still in her chair, looked back at him. She did not smile. She did not react. She simply held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. In the hallway afterward, Patricia gripped Claire's arm briefly and said, "We have the meeting. Now we use it." Jim Alcott shook Ethan's hand and said, "That was a good day's work." And Patty from the diner, who was standing near the stairs and had clearly been trying to figure out what to say, since the moment she arrived, stepped forward and looked at Claire with an expression that was complicated and honest and deserved credit for being both. "Claire," Patty said, "I owe you an apology." Claire looked at her. "I said things," Patty said, "to people who came into the diner, about you, without knowing anything, without knowing you at all." She stopped. She was not a woman who found this kind of speech easy, and she wasn't pretending otherwise. "I'm sorry for that." Claire was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for coming today," Claire said. It was not a dismissal. It was not a full forgiveness either. It was something more honest than both. It was acknowledgement, the recognition that a person had shown up when it cost them something, and that counted. Patty nodded. She went back down the stairs. Ethan watched Claire watch her go. Then his phone rang. "Robert." "I'm on my way back," Robert said. "Walter's with me." Ethan stopped walking. "What?" he said. "Walter Whitmore is in my passenger seat," Robert said. "He asked to leave the facility for a few days, and they couldn't stop him because he's a mentally competent adult who made a voluntary choice, so he left." A pause. "He'd like to see Claire." Ethan turned to Claire. "My dad's bringing Walter," he said. "They're on their way back." Claire's hand came up to her face, just briefly. She pressed her fingers against her lips for a moment. Then she said, "How long?" "Hour and 40 minutes, Ethan said. He was already on his way to the stairs. "Let's get back to the ranch." They were at the ranch when Robert's car pulled in just after 5 in the evening. Walter Whitmore got out slowly with the careful movement of a man who knows his body's current limitations and works within them with dignity. He was wearing a good shirt, the kind you put on when you're going somewhere that matters. Claire walked to him. She didn't run. She walked deliberately, like each step was intentional, and when she reached him, she took his hands in hers, both of them, and held them. "Walter," she said. "Claire," he said. He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man seeing something he had been worried about and finding it more intact than he feared. "You look tired," he said. "I've been busy," she said. "I know," he said. "Robert told me." He looked around at the ranch, at the barn, the fences, the field beyond. He breathed in slowly. "Thomas would be glad," he said, "that you're still here." She squeezed his hands once and then let him walk. Hector came out of the barn and stopped when he saw Walter. He took his hat off, which was the most profound gesture of respect Ethan had ever seen a person make in a casual moment. "Mr. Whitmore," Hector said. "Hector," Walter said. He extended his hand and Hector shook it. "Thank you for taking care of this place." "Miss Claire takes care of it," Hector said. "I just work here." Walter smiled. They all went inside. That evening, at the kitchen table with Walter, sitting at the head of the way, Thomas used to sit with Robert across from him and Patricia at one end, and Hector standing near the doorway, and Ethan and Claire on the same side of the table for the first time. Without planning it, they went through the full evidence structure for the public meeting. Patricia walked them through what she would present. The forensic document analysis, the contract timeline, the wire transfer records she had subpoenaed through channels that Richard had not anticipated her having access to, Thomas's letter, the testimonies that Hector and Walter would provide. Walter listened to all of it. When Patricia finished, he folded his hands on the table. "I will be there," he said. "I want to speak." "Walter," Claire said, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said, with the particular firmness of a man who is 81 years old and has earned the right to be firm. "Richard is my son, and what he has done is wrong, and I am not going to sit in a facility in Grand Junction while the truth is told in my family's name without my voice being part of it." He looked at Claire. "Thomas trusted you with this ranch. The least I can do is trust you with my testimony." Nobody argued with that. The next 7 days were the fastest and most concentrated period of work Ethan had experienced since coming back to Willow Creek. Patricia prepared this presentation documents. Jim Alcott filed a companion formal complaint with the county's Legal Oversight Office, creating an additional public record trail. Ethan handled the Henderson Project permit review, which collapsed when he submitted the full documented counter evidence, and the county inspector quietly acknowledged the original filing had been complete. That battle ended without fanfare, which suited Ethan fine. Richard was not quiet during those 7 days. He made moves. On the Monday before the meeting, a story appeared in the regional newspaper, the kind of story that is technically not a lie because it carefully omits everything that would contradict its framing. It described the Whitmore Ranch's financial difficulties in detail and included a quote from an unnamed source describing Claire as a woman who had struggled with the responsibilities of managing the estate she had inherited. The word inherited was doing a lot of work in that sentence. On Wednesday, 2 men who Ethan didn't recognize drove slowly past the ranch entrance 3 times in the same afternoon. Hector noted their license plate. Patricia ran it through a contact she had in Denver. It came back registered to a property research company that Richard's development firm had used in 3 previous land acquisition projects. On Thursday, Richard called Claire directly. She answered. Ethan was at the kitchen table with her when the call came in. He heard her say Richard, and then he watched her face as she listened. He could not hear Richard's words, but he watched what they did to Claire's face, which was nothing. She listened with the stillness of a person who has already decided that whatever is being said cannot move her, and she was right. When Richard finished, she said, "I'll see you at the meeting, Richard." She ended the call. She set the phone down. "What did he say?" Ethan asked. She looked at the table for a moment. "He said that if I dropped the evidence presentation, he would drop the estate claims and allow the ranch to continue operating independently," she said. "He called it a compromise." "He called it a compromise," Ethan repeated. "He said he had always wanted what was best for the ranch," she said. "He said this had all been a misunderstanding and there was no reason for it to become a public spectacle." "He's scared," Ethan said. "I know," she said. "What did it feel like to hear him say that?" Ethan asked. She was quiet for a moment. "It felt like being offered something with one hand," she said, "by someone who has a knife in the other." She looked at Ethan. "He's not offering peace. He's offering disappearance. Drop the evidence, go back to struggling quietly, and eventually the ranch still fails and he still gets what he wants, just without the public embarrassment." "That's exactly what it is," Ethan said. "I know what it is," she said. She picked up her coffee mug. "I told him I'd see him at the meeting," she said, "and I meant it." The morning of the public meeting arrived on a Friday that felt heavier than most Fridays do. Ethan woke at 4:30 and lay in the dark thinking about the town that was going to fill that meeting room in a few hours. The people who had heard Claire's name for years and shaped it into something it wasn't. The people who had trusted Richard because trust in small towns flows toward familiarity, and he had been familiar for a long time. The people who Ethan believed were not bad people, but had been given only one version of a story. He got up and made coffee and called his father. Robert answered at 5. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked. "Ready," Robert said. "Dad," Ethan said, "you've been doing too much this week. The drive to Grand Junction, the meeting preparation." "I've been doing exactly the right amount," Robert said. "Don't start managing me. You sound like your mother." Ethan almost smiled. "Is Walter ready?" he asked. "He was up before me," Robert said. "He ironed his shirt himself. He refused help." "Okay," Ethan said. "I'll see you there." He called Claire at 6. She answered on the first ring. "I've been awake since 3, she said before he could speak. "Me too," he said. A pause, just breathing on both ends of the line. The particular comfort of knowing another person is awake in the same dark. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Whatever happens today," she said, "I need you to know that what you did coming here, staying all of it, it wasn't nothing." "I know it wasn't nothing," he said. "I mean for me," she said. "Personally, not just the ranch." A pause. "I had started to believe that I was what they said I was. Not consciously, but somewhere underneath everything. When you hear something long enough from enough directions. She stopped. You made it stop mattering what they said, because you saw something different and you believed it. He sat with that for a moment. You made it easy, he said, to believe, because what I was seeing was true. Another pause. I'll see you at the meeting, she said. I'll be there, he said. The Willow Creek County Commissioner meeting room held about 120 people when fully occupied. By the time Ethan arrived at 9:45 for the 10 o'clock meeting, it was full. Not almost full. Full. He had not expected that. He stood at the back for a moment and looked at the room. He saw Rudy from the gas station sitting with a man Ethan recognized as his brother. He saw Carol Stanton from the town council. He saw Dale Hutchins, who caught Ethan's eye across the room with an expression that was complicated and human and probably cost him something. He saw the families, the 12 families Hector had mentioned the first day Ethan came to the ranch, or most of them people who had worked that land and whose lives were directly connected to what happened today. He saw Richard. Richard was in the front row, flanked by Schaefer and the second Denver lawyer. He was dressed the way he always dressed, well and deliberately, and he was speaking quietly to Schaefer with the composure of a man who has a plan. Ethan found his seat. Claire came in 2 minutes later with Patricia beside her and Hector behind her and Walter Whitmore on her arm. When Walter walked into that room, a visible shift happened, because Walter Whitmore was not an unknown quantity in Willow Creek. He was the father of Thomas Whitmore. He was the patriarch of the family whose name was on the ranch, whose name was on half the county records going back to 1947. And he was walking in on Claire's arm. Several people in the room looked at Richard when Walter appeared. Richard was looking at the table in front of him. The 3 county commissioners took their seats at the front table. The chair, a woman named Linda Park, who had been in the role for 6 years and ran meetings with efficient authority, opened the session and moved through the preliminary agenda items with the practiced speed of someone who knows the room is waiting for something specific. When she reached the Whitmore estate item, the room's energy changed, like a pressure adjustment. Everyone felt it. This agenda item is being presented by Patricia Garza, attorney, on behalf of Claire Whitmore, Linda Park said. Ms. Garza, you have the floor. Patricia stood. She took 22 minutes. Ethan had timed her rehearsal the night before, and she had hit 22 minutes, and she hit it again now exactly. She was precise, clear, and completely without drama. She let the document speak. She walked the commissioners and the room through the original contracts, the modified versions, the forensic analysis. She placed Thomas's letter on the record and read the relevant sections aloud. She introduced the wire transfer records showing the redirection of ranch income. She was methodical and thorough, and she never once raised her voice. When she finished, she sat down. The room was very quiet. Linda Park looked at her fellow commissioners. They exchanged brief looks of the kind that convey significant amounts of information in a short time. We will hear from witnesses, Linda said. Hector Reyes. Hector stood. He spoke for 8 minutes. He was not a polished speaker. He was something better, which was a completely credible one. He described what he had observed over 3 years with the calm specificity of a man who had been keeping careful mental notes because he understood that someday they would matter. He described payment delays, contract changes, Richard's increasing presence on the ranch during Thomas's illness, and the moment he had tried to raise his concerns with Thomas. When he sat down, the room was still quiet. Linda Park looked at her notes. Walter Whitmore, she said. Walter stood slowly. Robert, seated beside him, steadied his arm once without making it obvious. Walter looked at the room. He had the particular presence of a man who has earned every year of his age and is not pretending otherwise. I am Thomas Whitmore's father, he said. His voice was steady, quiet. It carried anyway, because the room was listening. I built the Whitmore Ranch with my wife in 1947, and I gave it to my son because Thomas was the kind of man who deserved to hold something worth keeping. He paused. Thomas chose Claire to stand beside him and to stand for that ranch after he was gone. He told me so himself in the hospital 11 days before he died, and he told me his brother was going to try to take what was not his. He looked at the table. Then he looked at the room. I am 81 years old. I don't have time for careful speeches. Richard Whitmore is my son, and I love him, and what he has done to his brother's wife and his brother's land and his brother's workers is wrong. The documents you have seen today tell the truth. Thomas's letter tells the truth, and I am asking you as the man whose name is on that deed and whose son built that ranch to protect it." He sat down. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then someone in the back began to clap. It was not a performative burst of applause. It was one person, then two, then a spreading sound that moved through the room the way weather moves. Not everyone joined it, but most people did. And the ones who did were not clapping for theater. They were clapping because they had just been given something they hadn't realized they needed, which was the truth told plainly by people who had lived inside it. Richard stood up. Schaefer put a hand on his arm. Richard did not sit back down. "I would like to respond," he said to Linda Park. "You'll have the opportunity," Linda said evenly. "Please be seated until I call on you." Richard sat, but the room had already shifted. Ethan, watching from his seat, felt it, like a tide that had been running one direction for years, choosing a different channel. Not dramatic, not instantaneous, but unmistakable. When Richard's lawyers were given their time, Schaefer performed competently. He questioned the authenticity of the forensic analysis. He suggested the letter had been produced under emotional duress. He used phrases like alleged misconduct and interpretation of estate documents and procedural irregularities in the original filing, all of which were technically defensible, and all of which sounded in the aftermath of what the room had just heard, like the particular noise that people make when they know they are losing the argument. And then Richard himself stood. He spoke directly. He was composed. He said he had acted always in the interest of the Whitmore family legacy. He said the contracts in question had been modified with Thomas's full knowledge. He said Claire had mismanaged the ranch's finances. He said the people in the room had been misled by documents that were presented without full context. He said all of this well. And Ethan watched the room not move. That was the thing. That was what Richard had not accounted for. The room did not shift back toward him. The faces that had been listening to him for years, that had nodded along with his version of events over coffee and at the hardware store and in the diner, those faces were looking at him now with something different. Not hostility. Something quieter and more permanent than hostility. Doubt. Once it arrives, it doesn't leave easily. Richard finished and sat down. Linda Park conferred quietly with her two fellow commissioners for 3 minutes. Then she looked up. "This commission finds sufficient cause to refer the documentary evidence presented today to the county attorney's office for formal review," she said. "Additionally, we are issuing an immediate request to the probate court to stay any pending estate actions related to the Whitmore property pending that review." She looked at the room. "This meeting is adjourned." The sound in the room after that was not applause. It was something more like the sound of people exhaling. Ethan sat still for a moment. Then he looked at Claire. She was sitting straight in her chair, both hands flat on the table. Her face was very still, and it took him a moment to understand what the stillness was, because he had seen her still before in the kitchen the morning he first came on the bridge repair days in the car, driving back from Grand Junction. But this stillness was different from all of those. This one was not the stillness of a person holding something in. This was the stillness of a person who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had just for the first time set it down. She turned and looked at Ethan. He looked back at her, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that words would add to that moment that the moment didn't already contain. Patricia leaned across and said something to Claire quietly. Claire nodded. Hector stood up behind them and touched Claire's shoulder once, and then moved toward the families in the room, because there were people who needed to hear from him directly that things were going to be okay. Walter was being helped to his feet by Robert, and the two old men exchanged a look between them that had the weight of people who have seen enough of life to understand what today meant, and what it had cost, and what it was worth. And Richard Whitmore walked out of the room with his lawyers on either side of him, and he did not look at Claire as he passed, and that too was something. Outside on the courthouse steps, Ethan stood beside Claire in the late morning air. The meeting had run just over 2 hours. The town was moving around them, people coming out of the buildings, speaking to each other, the particular animated conversation of a community that has just been through something together and is still processing it. Dale Hutchins stopped in front of them. He looked at Claire. "I owe you more than an apology," he said, "but it's what I've got right now." Claire looked at him steadily. "Show up for your neighbors the way you showed up today," she said. "That's enough." Dale nodded. He walked away. Ethan watched him go. Then he said without looking at Claire, "That was generous." "He's not a bad man," she said. "He just believed something that wasn't true. That's different from being bad." He looked at her. "You know," he said, "for someone who has been treated as badly as you have a remarkably low appetite for vengeance." She was quiet for a moment. "Vengeance requires caring what they think of you," she said. "I stopped needing their opinion a long time ago." She paused. "What I needed was for the ranch to survive, and for Thomas's truth to exist somewhere besides a letter in a drawer." She looked at the street. "That happened today." His phone buzzed. Jim Alcott. He answered. "The county attorney's office just called me," Jim said. "They're opening a formal inquiry. Richard's lawyers are already on the phone with them. This is going to be a process, Ethan. Months, not weeks." "The ranch has 5 months," Ethan said. "The stay from the probate court buys time," Jim said. "No forced sale proceedings while the inquiry is open." "That's what we needed," Ethan said. "Yes," Jim said. "It is." He ended the call. He told Claire. She absorbed it. 5 months, she said. 5 months to show the operation is viable, Ethan said. With the stayed proceedings, you have time to stabilize the income, rebuild, the contracts demonstrate solvency. That's a lot of work, she said. I know, he said. She looked at him. Are you still around for a lot of work? She said, and there was something in the question that was about more than construction. He met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked back at the street, at the town, at the people moving through it, some of whom she had watched judge her for years, and some of whom had just today taken a first step toward seeing something different. Then let's get back to work, she said. They got back to work. That was the thing about Claire Whitmore that Ethan had understood from the very first morning he drove up that ranch road. She did not wait for permission to begin. The meeting had ended. The stay had been issued. The county inquiry was open, and by 6 o'clock that same evening, she was at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a fresh column of numbers mapping out the next 5 months, like a general who has just won one battle and knows the war is not over. Ethan sat across from her. Patricia Garza had driven back to Denver with copies of everything and a commitment to file the formal civil recovery action within the week. Jim Alcott was handling the county attorney correspondence. Robert had driven Walter back to Grand Junction, and Walter had gone willingly with the quiet dignity of a man who had done what he came to do and was ready to rest. Hector had spent the afternoon with the remaining workers walking the property, making assessments, talking to people who needed to hear a steady voice. And Ethan and Claire sat at the table and did what needed to be done next, which was the unglamorous and essential work of figuring out exactly where things stood and exactly what survival was going to require. The 3 contracts Richard renegotiated represented about 40% of the ranch's annual income, Claire said. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the numbers. With the stay in place, we can petition the probate court to restore the original terms while the inquiry is open. How long does that petition take? Ethan asked. Jim thinks 4 to 6 weeks, she said. In the meantime, we're operating on existing reserves and the income from the remaining contracts. What does that look like? He said. She turned the legal pad toward him. He looked at the numbers. Tight, he said. Very tight, she said. But workable. If we don't have any major equipment failures in the next 60 days, and if the East Field produces on schedule, and if we can bring back 2 of the workers we had to let go last fall. Can you bring them back? He said. I called them this afternoon, she said. Both of them said yes. He looked at her. You called them this afternoon, he said. After the meeting, after everything today. The meeting was this morning, she said without any particular drama. This is now. He shook his head slightly, not in disbelief. in something closer to admiration for a quality he didn't have a precise word for, which was the capacity to keep moving toward the necessary thing regardless of what the day had cost. "What do you need from me?" he said. She looked at the list she had been making. "The south barn roof has been patched twice in 2 years," she said. "It needs to be done properly before winter, or I'll lose the equipment stored inside. And the irrigation system on the east field has a pressure problem that's been reducing yield." "I can have someone on the barn roof Monday," he said. "And I want to look at the irrigation system myself." She looked at him. "That's construction work," she said. "That's actual work. Are you sure you have the capacity with the Henderson project and everything else?" "I'll make the capacity," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "Ethan," she said, "I want to say something." "Okay," he said. "When this is over, when the inquiry concludes and the contracts are restored and the ranch is stable, I don't want you to feel like you have to keep coming out here," she said. She said it carefully, the way she said things she had thought about for a while before saying them. "You came to fix a bridge. You stayed because the situation required it, but you have your own life and your father and your company, and I don't want to be something that you feel obligated to." He let her finish. Then he said, "Are you asking me to leave?" "No," she said immediately. Then more quietly, "No." "Then I'm not sure what we're discussing," he said. She looked at the table. "I'm not good at this part," she said. "What part?" he said. "The part where someone stays," she said. "Because they want to." He was quiet for a moment. "Get used to it," he said. She looked up at him. And for the first time in weeks, the careful, controlled composure that she wore like a second skin moved aside for just a moment, and something underneath it surfaced. Not tears, something before tears. The expression of a person for whom a door they had given up believing in has just opened. She looked back at the legal pad. "Barn roof Monday," she said. "Barn roof Monday," he agreed. The weeks that followed were the fullest Ethan had known since coming back to Willow Creek. The Henderson project wrapped cleanly with the permit issue formally dismissed after Jim Alcott's counter-filing was sustained. 2 new contracts came in through word-of-mouth smaller jobs, but steady ones, and Ethan hired a 3rd crew member, which allowed Walker Construction to run 2 sites simultaneously for the first time since Robert had gotten sick. Robert himself had a follow-up appointment with his cardiologist that went well enough that the doctor cleared him for limited office work, which meant he started coming into the construction office 3 mornings a week and applying his 22 years of accumulated knowledge to the organizational problems Ethan had been trying to solve alone. The county inquiry moved on the timeline Jim Alcott had predicted. The forensic document analysis that Patricia Garza submitted was accepted into the record. 2 of the attorneys who had worked on the estate contracts in the immediate aftermath of Thomas's death were subpoenaed. One of them, a man who had since left the firm he'd been with at the time, agreed to provide a statement. His statement was 3 pages long and quietly devastating. Richard retained a 3rd attorney and filed 2 separate motions to delay the inquiry. Both were denied. The probate court restored the original contract terms 6 weeks after the stay was issued, which meant income began flowing back to the ranch on a schedule that matched what Thomas had originally negotiated. It was not immediate. The first payment under the restored terms arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November, and Claire called Ethan to tell him. "The payment came through," she said. He could hear something in her voice that she was not labeling, and he was not going to label for her. "Good," he said. "It's the first time in 3 years that an expected payment actually arrived on the day it was supposed to," she said. He thought about what to say to that. "That's how it's supposed to work," he finally said. "I know," she said. And she said it like someone who has rediscovered a truth they'd forgotten was real. The barn roof was finished in 4 days. The irrigation pressure problem on the east field turned out to be a failing pressure regulator that Ethan replaced himself on a Saturday morning with Hector beside him, handing him tools with the wordless efficiency of someone who has worked alongside capable people long enough to read the rhythm of the work. When the system came back up to full pressure and the east field irrigation ran clean, Hector stood there and watched it for a full minute without saying anything. Then he said, "Thomas installed that system himself. Took him 2 weeks. Ethan looked at the field. "Good system," he said. "Good man," Hector said. They stood there for another moment, then they went back to work. Walter Whitmore called Claire every Sunday morning. She told Ethan this on a Wednesday afternoon when they were walking the property fence line together doing a condition assessment that she insisted on doing in person rather than asking Hector to do because she believed that understanding the ranch meant touching it, knowing which posts needed attention and which fields needed resting and which corners of the property had drainage problems when the snow came. "He calls every Sunday," she said, "like he used to when Thomas was alive." "How is he?" Ethan asked. "He sounds better," she said. "He told me he's been arguing with the facility staff about the quality of their coffee, which I think means he's getting his strength back." Ethan smiled. "Richard hasn't tried to restrict his access again?" Ethan asked. "No," she said. After the meeting, after the inquiry opened, I think Richard understood that trying to isolate Walter further would only make things worse for him legally. She paused. "Richard is being very quiet right now." "Quiet doesn't mean done," Ethan said. "I know," she said, "but quiet means we have time." They were at the east corner of the property where the fence line met a stand of old pine that marked the boundary with the adjacent land. Claire checked a post, testing it with both hands, nodding when it held. "Ethan," she said. She was still facing the fence. "Yeah," he said. "My father-in-law called me something on Sunday," she said. "He called me the best thing that happened to the Whitmore name." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about that all week. Not because it made me feel good exactly, because it made me realize how long it's been since anyone said something like that to me. Something that treated me like I had given something rather than taken something." He looked at the side of her face. "You've given everything," he said. She turned to look at him. "So have you," she said. "And you didn't have to." "No," he said. "I didn't have to." They looked at each other. In the cold air of a November afternoon on the east corner of the Whitmore Ranch, with the mountains visible and the pine trees making the particular sound they make in a wind that carries the first suggestion of winter. Then she stepped forward and she put her arms around him. Not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement, just the simple, deliberate movement of a person who has decided to close a distance. He put his arms around her. They stood like that for a moment that was long enough to matter, and short enough that neither of them had to decide what to do with it yet. Then she stepped back. She looked at the fence line. "This post needs replacing," she said. "I'll bring the materials Monday," he said. She nodded and kept walking. He kept pace beside her, and neither of them mentioned what had just happened because it didn't need mentioning. It existed. That was sufficient. The county inquiry released its preliminary findings on a Thursday in early December, 11 weeks after the public meeting. Ethan was in his construction office when Jim Alcott called. "It's not a final determination," Jim said, "but the preliminary findings are that there is sufficient evidence of intentional alteration of estate documents to refer the matter to the State Attorney General for criminal investigation." Ethan set down his coffee mug. "Criminal," he said. "Contract fraud," Jim said. "Potentially wire fraud depending on the banking transactions. This is no longer a civil matter, only Ethan. Richard is looking at criminal exposure." "How serious?" Ethan asked. "Serious enough that his Denver lawyers filed a motion to suppress the forensic analysis within 2 hours of the preliminary findings being published," Jim said, "which tells you they're scared." "Are they going to succeed?" Ethan asked. "No," Jim said. "Patricia's analysis was conducted and submitted through proper channels. The motion will be denied." Ethan absorbed this. "Does Claire know?" he asked. "I'm calling her next," Jim said. "Give me 5 minutes," Ethan said. He called Claire before Jim did. She answered immediately. "I just got off the phone with Jim," he said. "Jim was going to call me," she said. "I wanted to call you first," he said. A pause. "Tell me," she said. He told her. The silence after he finished was the kind that has weight. Then she said, "Criminal investigation." "Yes," he said. Another silence. "Is it wrong that I don't feel what I expected to feel?" she said. "What did you expect to feel?" he asked. "Satisfaction," she said, "or relief, or something that feels like winning." A pause. "But mostly I just feel tired and sad. Because Richard is Thomas's brother, and whatever he's done, Thomas loved him. And somewhere underneath all of it, there's a family that's been breaking for a long time. He didn't say anything immediately, because that response, that quiet, complicated, unsentimental grief for a situation that would have justified anger in anyone else, was one of the truest things he had ever heard a person say. "That's not wrong," he said. "That's who you are." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to call Walter." "Of course," he said. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Thank you for calling me first," she said. He drove out to the ranch that evening. He didn't have a specific reason. He brought a bag of groceries because he had been at the store, and it seemed practical, and he told himself that was the reason, even though the actual reason was simpler. He wanted to be there. Claire opened the door when he pulled up, which meant she had been watching again. She looked at the groceries. "You bought food?" she said. "I was at the store," he said. She stepped back to let him in. "Hector took the crew home early," she said. "It's just me tonight." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You're staying for dinner," she said. "If that's all right," he said. "It's all right," she said. They cooked together in the way that people cook together when they have been in the same spaces often enough to know each other's movements. She did the things she knew how to do, and he did the things he knew how to do, and they talked about practical things while doing it. The East Field yield numbers, the barn roof's performance through the first cold, stretch the fence post replacement schedule. Ordinary things. The texture of a life. After dinner, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table with coffee, she said, "I want to tell you something I've never told anyone." "Okay," he said. "When Thomas died," she said, "in the first months after, I almost left." He was quiet. "Not because I wanted to give up," she said. "Because I thought staying was arrogance. Because I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was the wrong person. Maybe someone else could do this better. Maybe Thomas had made a mistake putting it in my hands." She looked at the table. "I almost sold to Richard." He let that sit. "What stopped you?" he asked. "Hector," she said. "He came to the house the morning I had decided to call Richard. He didn't know what I was about to do. He just came to tell me that 3 of the cattle had been born healthy overnight, and 2 of them were the strongest calves he'd seen in years. He stood in that doorway, and he told me about those calves with the kind of pride that belongs to someone who loves a thing purely without any interest in owning it." She stopped, "And I thought if Hector can love this place like that, the least I can do is try to deserve it." Ethan looked at her. "You've deserved it every day since," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm starting to believe that," she said. "That's new." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held his. They stayed like that for a while, not speaking, not needing to. The winter moved in properly through December and into January, and the ranch held. The East Field delivered. The restored contract payments arrived on schedule. The 2 workers Claire had called back in October were fully integrated back into the operation. Hector ran the day-to-day with the same steady authority he always had, and the small differences, a repaired barn roof that didn't leak an irrigation system running at full-pressure fences that were tighter than they had been in years. Those differences accumulated into something you could feel when you walked the property. Something that felt like a place that was being cared for by people who intended to stay. Richard's legal situation developed through the winter, in the way that serious legal situations develop slowly, with long periods of apparent silence, broken by procedural movements that each meant something significant to the people involved. The State Attorney General's office opened a formal criminal investigation in January. Richard's attorney issued a statement calling the investigation politically motivated, which satisfied no one and surprised fewer people. The civil recovery action Patricia had filed on Claire's behalf moved through the initial stages with the weight of the documentary evidence behind it. Richard was not in Willow Creek much during those months. People noticed. The conversations at Rudy's gas station and Lou's diner shifted. Not dramatically, not with the particular satisfaction of people who enjoy being proven wrong about their loyalties, more with the quiet recalibration that happens when a community absorbs new information over time and gradually adjusts what it believes about itself. Patty at the diner started setting aside the good booth for Claire on the mornings Claire came in, which she did occasionally now deliberately, because she had decided that the town was not somewhere she needed to be invisible, and Ethan had told her he agreed. Dale Hutchins had shown up at the ranch with a chainsaw and 3 hours of help clearing a fallen tree from the access road in early December. He had not made a speech about it. He had simply shown up, done the work, accepted a cup of coffee, and left. Which was, as Claire said afterward, the most useful kind of apology. Carol Stanton from the town council had reached out to Patricia Garza to ask whether there was a county-level policy mechanism that could provide additional oversight protections for small agricultural operations in contested estate situations. Patricia had said there probably should be, and that she would be glad to help draft one. Small movements, real ones, the kind that don't make headlines because they happen in the ordinary moments between people who are quietly deciding to be better. In February, Robert Walker's cardiologist cleared him for full office work. Robert came into the office on a Monday morning and sat at the desk he had built with his own hands 22 years ago and looked at the 2 new contracts on the board and the updated equipment list and the crew schedule Ethan had developed, and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You've done well with this." Ethan looked at him. "You built it," Ethan said. "I'm just keeping it going." "That's not a small thing," Robert said. "Keeping something going. Most people don't understand that keeping something alive requires the same courage as building it the first time." He picked up the crew schedule and looked at it. "Sometimes more." Ethan thought about Claire saying the same thing without using those exact words every single day in the way she worked. "I know," he said. In March, exactly 1 year after the county meeting, the civil court issued a ruling in the recovery action. Patricia Garza called Claire at 8 in the morning. Ethan was at the ranch. He knew she was going to call because Patricia had told him the night before that the ruling was coming, and he had driven out early because he wanted to be there when it happened, not to manage it, not to translate it, just to be present. Claire answered the phone in the kitchen while Ethan sat at the table with his coffee. He watched her face. Patricia spoke for about 4 minutes. Claire listened. Her expression was very still and very open, the particular stillness of someone receiving information that is going to change the shape of things and allowing themselves to feel that in real time. When she ended the call, she set the phone on the table. She looked at it for a moment. "The court ruled in our favor," she said. "Full recovery of the redirected income over 3 years, plus damages." She paused. "Richard is ordered to return the funds within 90 days. Ethan didn't say anything immediately. "The criminal investigation continues separately," she said. "That's still ongoing, but the civil recovery is done." She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. 3 years, she said. "Thomas knew. He set it up. He believed I would get here." "He was right," Ethan said. She looked at the table. "Patricia says the recovery amount combined with the restored contracts puts the ranch on solid financial footing for the next several years. She says if we manage it well, which—" She stopped and smiled slightly. "She says if we manage it the way we have been, it's going to be fine." "It's going to be fine," Ethan said. "Hector doesn't know yet," she said. "You should tell him," Ethan said. She stood up. She went to the back door and called for Hector. Hector came in from the yard, pulling off his work gloves, reading her face the way he always did, with the accuracy of a man who has known someone through their hardest years. She told him. Hector stood very still. Then he sat down at the kitchen table, which he almost never did, and he put both his hands flat on the table, and he looked at them, and the only sound in the kitchen for a moment was the particular sound of a man who has been holding something tightly for a very long time, finally being able to let go. "Thomas would be glad," he said, very quietly. "I know," Claire said. Hector nodded. He stood back up. He picked up his gloves. "I've got the east fence to check," he said. He went back outside. Claire looked at the door he had gone through. "That man," she said softly, "held this place together with me for 3 years, and he never once complained, and he never once doubted." "He knew who you were," Ethan said. "He'd known for a long time." She turned to look at Ethan. "So did you," she said, "from very early." "Not from the beginning," he said honestly. "From pretty early." She considered that. "What did you see?" she said. "When you came here the first time? What did you actually see?" He thought about it carefully, because she was asking something real, and she deserved a real answer. "I saw someone who was doing the work," he said, "not performing it, not asking for credit, just doing it every day alone in a place where nobody was watching. And I thought, that's the kind of person you can trust, because they do the same thing whether or not anyone is looking." She was quiet. "I do the same thing whether or not anyone is looking," she said, "because it's the right thing to do." "I know," he said. "That's what I saw." She sat back down at the table, not across from him this time, beside him. She put her coffee mug on the table and leaned back in the chair, and for a moment she just breathed quietly, like a person who has run a very long race and has just crossed a finish line and is still learning what it means to stop. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "What do you mean?" he said. "I mean, I've been so focused on survival for so long," she said, "on keeping this place alive, on proving what was true. I've forgotten what it feels like to think about the future without it being about preventing something bad from happening." She looked at the ceiling. "I'm not sure I know how to want things anymore. Things that are just for me, not for the ranch or for Thomas's legacy or for the workers. Just things I want." He looked at her. "Then start small," he said. She looked at him. "What do you want right now?" he said. "This moment. Small." She thought about it. "Coffee that doesn't get cold because I forget to drink it while I'm working," she said. He picked up her mug and handed it to her. She took it and held it with both hands and laughed. A real laugh, short and genuine, the kind that comes out before you've decided to let it. He had heard her laugh before. Small versions, but not that one. That one was new. He filed it away. One Sunday morning in early April, Walter Whitmore called Claire at his usual time. Ethan was at the ranch. He had been staying over more often in the spare room that Claire had stopped calling the spare room and started calling just the room, and he was reading at the kitchen table when the call came in. She spoke to Walter for almost an hour. When she hung up, she came back to the kitchen with an expression he hadn't seen before. "He wants to come back," she said. "To the ranch?" Ethan asked. "To live here," she said. "Permanently. He said he's done with the facility. He said he wants to be on the land that has his son in it." She sat down. "He said if I'll have him." "What did you say?" Ethan asked. "I said yes," she said, "before I even thought about it." "Good," Ethan said. "It's more complicated with a person here," she said, "with his health needs and his schedule and—" "Claire," Ethan said. She stopped. "It's Walter," he said. "It's Thomas's father. It's the right thing." She looked at him. "You know," she said, "you have a habit of making the complicated things sound simple." "They're not always simple," he said, "but they're usually clear." She held his gaze for a moment. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah," he said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly," she said. "Okay," he said. "Are you here because you feel responsible for what happens to this ranch?" she said. "Or are you here because of me?" He looked at her directly. "The ranch is fine," he said. "The ranch is more than fine. The ranch doesn't need me anymore." He paused. "I'm here because of you." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked down at the table. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said, and she was fighting something that might have been a smile. "I wanted to hear you say it." He shook his head slowly. "You could have asked 6 months ago," he said. "I know," she said. "I wasn't ready 6 months ago." "Are you ready now?" he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. Walter came home to the Whitmore Ranch on the first day of May. Hector and 2 of the workers had prepared the downstairs bedroom in the main house, the room that had originally been the master suite, before Thomas built a new addition, and they had done it with the particular care that people take when they understand that someone is arriving to stay and that staying matters. Robert drove Walter from Grand Junction. When the car came up the ranch road, Claire was standing on the porch, and Hector was standing near the barn, and 3 of the workers were nearby with their hats in their hands, not because anyone told them to be there, but because they understood this was a moment. Walter got out of the car. He looked at the ranch. He stood there for a moment. And then he did something that Robert told Ethan about later, quietly in the parking lot of Lou's Diner one afternoon when they were both getting lunch. Walter had looked at the green fields and the repaired barn. and the cattle in the far paddock, and the woman standing on the porch of the house that bore his family's name, and he had said to no one in particular, or perhaps to someone who was no longer there in any way that could be measured, but might still be listening. Thomas. She held it. 2 words. She held it. Ethan stood beside the truck when Robert told him this and was quiet for a long moment. Then he went back into the diner. Because some things deserve a moment of silence, and then you keep moving forward, which is what the people in this story had done through all of it and intended to keep doing. By summer, Willow Creek had quietly reorganized its understanding of itself. Not completely. Small towns never change completely because the thing that makes them worth living in is also the thing that makes them slow to move, which is that they hold on. They hold on to what they know and who they are and the stories that make sense of things. And the story of Claire Whitmore and the Whitmore Ranch had been part of the town's sense of itself for 3 years. But stories can be rewritten, not erased. Rewritten. The people who had repeated the rumors didn't announce that they'd been wrong. They didn't gather in the diner and give speeches. They just gradually stopped saying certain things and started saying other things. They showed up at the ranch's late summer open day, the first one in 4 years, where Claire and Hector and the workers laid out food and showed people the east field and let the kids pet the horses. 120 people came. Patty brought 2 pies. Dale Hutchins brought his whole family and stayed for 3 hours. Carol Stanton walked the property with Hector and asked real questions about the operation. Richard Whitmore resolved his criminal case in early autumn through a plea agreement that Ethan and Claire were not party to. The terms were sealed, but the civil recovery was not affected. The funds arrived in the estate account in September on time in full. Ethan got the notification from Patricia Garza while he was walking the fence line with Claire on a Thursday afternoon. He showed her the message on his phone. She read it. She handed the phone back to him. She kept walking. "Is that it?" he said. "That's it," she said. "How do you feel?" he said. "Like I want to check the north fence post before the cold comes," she said. "And then I want to have dinner." She glanced at him. "With you?" "That can be arranged," he said. She kept walking. He kept pace beside her. Around them, the ranch moved in the particular rhythm of a working place, the sound of the cattle settling in the far paddock, the sound of Hector's truck crossing the access road toward the east field, the sound of 2 workers' voices from somewhere near the barn, the ordinary sound of a place that was alive and intending to stay that way. And Ethan Walker walked beside Claire Whitmore on a Thursday afternoon and felt with the simple completeness of a thing that has finally found its right place that this was where he was supposed to be. Not because he had planned it, not because anyone had asked him to be, but because a bridge had broken in a storm and he had answered the phone and driven out when everyone said not to, and the rest of it had followed from that, the way most true things follow from one honest choice made at the right moment. He had come to Willow Creek to fix his father's company. He had done that. But the thing he had actually fixed or helped fix or been part of fixing was something older and more important than concrete and timber. He had helped a woman who the whole town had dismissed into full view, and in seeing her, he had understood something about himself that he had not known he needed to understand, which was that the kind of man he wanted to be was not the kind who protected himself first. It was the kind who showed up, who looked, who stayed, who answered the phone. Claire stopped at the north fence line and tested a post with both hands. It held. She moved to the next one. "This one needs replacing," she said. "I'll bring the materials Saturday," he said. She nodded. She kept walking. He kept pace beside her. And that was enough. That was in fact everything. Because the woman everyone in Willow Creek had told Ethan Walker to stay away from had opened a door one morning and said she hoped he wouldn't listen, and he had not listened. And what grew from that refusal, what was built from that single act of seeing clearly in a town that had chosen not to, was a life that both of them were walking forward into together, one honest step at a time, on land that had earned its green and in a town that was slowly learning what it had almost let die. And some truths, once they take root in the right ground, do not need anyone's permission to grow.